Welcome back to the Orthodox Ethos. I'm Father Peter here. And tonight we have a wonderful opportunity with our brothers in Christ, our fellow co-workers in the vineyard, to discuss for the benefit of all you out there who are searching among Roman Catholicism to learn more about Orthodoxy. And we're going to be talking just in a moment about the best way, the best paths, the best resources available for you to go closer and go deeper into the Orthodox faith. Welcome, guys, to the stream. We're really glad to have you. Everybody knows a lot already about your stream, so not a lot to say, but glad to have Ben from Cleave to Antiquity, Alex from Cleave to Antiquity, his own show, and Cassian from Barrel Age Faith. Welcome to Orthodox Ethos.
Thanks for having us.
Nice to have you.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So I'll let you guys just say a few words about your work and you know the topic tonight before we get into the analysis and the presentation. But we're here tonight. I've asked you to come on tonight because we want to help all those searching out there. We want to help them with positive resources, show them what we've already learned, all of us on the path. Our experiences, what we hear, we're hearing from people all the time about how they came to Orthodoxy, and you have all kinds of experiences to share with the people, make it easier for them to get to their goal and to discern the truth. But let's start with Cassian over Barrel Age Faith. Tell us a little bit about yourself for everybody who doesn't know, and about your channel, and then we'll go to Alex, and then over to Ben.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me on, Father. It's also great to have us all together. First time, so this is a lot of fun. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I dabble in all sorts of things at Barrel Age Faith. You guys can check it out. Going through a course in the first Christian hymnal out of Jerusalem. It's just so Orthodox, and I think it's helpful for people to see how the church was worshiping in the year 300 AD. And yeah, so I dabble in lots of things. I'm seeing, of course, all sorts of people, whether that be various Protestant backgrounds, Buddhists, spiritual seekers, looking at Orthodoxy, and of course, Roman Catholics. And that was my background for 13 years. I grew up Protestant, but I was also Roman Catholic for 13 years and worked for a Catholic parish and Catholic high school. And so was in it. And so I bring that background to help people kind of navigate Protestants that might be looking at both options, Orthodoxy or Roman Catholicism, or Roman Catholics that are interested in becoming Orthodox.
Thank you so much. We love your work. It's always amazing to me. You find awesome people to interview, amazing little topics to address that are very timely, and it's all very practical and helpful. So thank you so much for your work.
Thank you, Father.
How about you, Alex?
I grew up mostly in the Romanian Pentecostal community. I spent a few years in a Baptist community, but there reached a certain point to where a lot of the things that I was hearing in the sermons at church, they just weren't adding up with, the scriptures, So after I went to law school and, started this professional career, I picked up a bunch of skills and investigative and fact finding skills and, continuity within this idea of precedent and being able to go back to, different cases prior to what we have today in the law. These exact same principles you can apply more or less to church history and continuity of the church. So when I dug deeper into this and I saw that there are certain guarantees and promises in the Bible about what the church is going to be like in terms of continuity, that you're going to have judges, that in Daniel chapter 2, it describes, as you know, Father, a stone that's uncut by human hands that will last forever. It will take over the kingdoms in that time, talking about the Greek kingdom, the Medo-Persian kingdom, the Babylonian kingdom, and the Roman kingdom, right? Which church did that? So I realized that after there are certain guarantees and requirements of continuity for what Christ's church is, well, then the whole chase started. And my approach was basically to start in Acts, the book of Acts, and to just go forward from there and see who changed, who spun off. And after doing that analysis, it seemed very clear to me that it was the Holy Orthodox Church that is the one that has the most continuity, that is actually faithful to, you know, what the apostles inherited from Christ and what they passed down to their successors. So in that analysis,
on your search, you looked at Catholicism.
Yes. Yeah. Was a major contender, but I think as we'll get into it tonight, there are some extreme, and not just minor, like extreme shortcomings to Roman Catholicism, especially when you're comparing it to the first century church.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And my name is Ben. I run the channel Cleave to Antiquity. I was a non-denominational pastor and Protestant apologist before journeying into the Orthodox Church. I think my engagement with Roman Catholics, I did a couple of different debates with Roman Catholic figures like Trent Doherty, who was a Roman Catholic linguistics scholar. That was a very interesting and memorable debate. But on my show, you know, I typically I'll cover some of the contemporary news, some of the things that are going on right now in the parishes and the Roman Catholic churches, as well as some of their persecution of some of the more trad Roman Catholics. It's very sad to me. You know, we have a lot of people come into our parishes. And I talk to almost all the new guys that go to my parish. If I see somebody I never saw before, I'm going to go up and introduce myself to them. And when I hear their stories, a lot of those that are coming from more like TLM background, things like this, they'll tell me about how they're getting pushed off into like a fellowship hall worship. Like they would start off in a cathedral. Then they were, oh, well, now guess what? The diocese is saying you're moving to a parish. Oh, well, now that's not good enough. Now they're moving you off into a fellowship hall. So things are really rough on the ground level right now. And I think that's an aspect a lot of people don't really look at. But if you follow Roman Catholic news and the things that are going on right now, you can actually kind of predict what's going to come up next. I think that's really important. And I did that a lot as when I was a Protestant as well. I'd follow up with the Roman Catholic news. So I think that'll be interesting to discuss in this conversation here as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. Well, we just have our good friend, Patrick Truglia, join us. Put him on the screen. How you doing, Patrick? Welcome.
Very good. It's the Brady Bunch here. Move our heads like this.
Why don't you give us a little 2 words about you and your work, and then also thoughts on the topic tonight before we introduce a little bit about the how we're going to do this.
Well, it's a very important topic, the issue of Roman Catholicism, because they're the world's largest Christian denomination. And it's just so much a part of culture, and really just being that we're speaking English, the paradigm of Christian religion. So many concepts that people are hung up with have to do with a very long, about 1,000-year Roman Catholic heritage. And so encountering Orthodoxy, encountering the patristics, oftentimes will shock people because they see how different things are than what they presume it was, due to certain presumptions from Protestantism and Roman Catholicism. And so this is an interest, this has been of great interest to me for quite some time. Perhaps the biggest contribution I've made on the topic is the book Rise and Fall of the Papacy. Here's up close, of course, behind, that's an uncut mountain press. For those who are, whether they're Roman Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, or just interested in the history of the ecclesiology of the original church, in fact, even of Judaism preceding Christianity, and just where did the papacy fit in and how did it develop, and ultimately what led to the tragic schism between the Orthodox and the Roman Catholics.
Awesome. Yeah. So we have, for everybody who does not know this publication, we have a little banner here. Let me put it on the screen. We're going to talk about it a little bit later, but I want everybody to know what he's talking about. So let's see. Here it is, I think. Rise and Fall of the Papacy, an Orthodox Perspective by Patrick Truglia from Uncut Mountain Press. So you can check that out right there. And that has been, there you go. Look at so, so that has been a pretty influential book. In fact, there was a pretty well-known dogmatic professor. What was his name? That thought that was pretty influential for his conversion to Orthodoxy.
Oh, there's Dr. Joshua, but there's been other academics. I don't know if the newest version includes their like accolades, the book, but Dr. Evangelist Chrysos, there's Father.
No, we got to update that. Yeah, we got to update that.
Father Theodore Stanway, who used to teach church history at Jordanville. So people are taking notice, and there'll be future publications of academic nature on ecclesiology, but this is the big one for now.
You mentioned the Pope and the whole history during your introductions, and I want to just remembered one of the most important topic, let's say lectures, books. It's not really a book that helped me on my way was this one right here, and you can find it online. It's the Orthodox Survival Course by Father Seraphim Rose. There's a bunch of different versions of this across the internet, but it's all in either audio or PDF format. But he goes through the entire, I mean, I'm just blowing through it, but goes through the entire history of the apostasy over the last 1,000 years. And it's so important. It's so important for everybody to understand everything in context. I think one of the biggest obstacles people face is they've got to get out of this context, see it differently, see it in a new light, see it from the Orthodox perspective, and see Orthodoxy in its own context. I think this is one of the biggest problems that we have, these, especially the hardcore apologists coming at Orthodoxy, constantly trying to fit this square or this round, hole, fit a square peg in it, and it's just like it's so irritating and so tiresome because they don't understand that everything is after the fact, as you show in your book, but as so much history just shows. Yves Congar, we have a whole video on that on Orthodox Ethos, how he says, yeah, everything changed from the 9th to the 12th century. It wasn't just the papacy. The papacy was the least. It was a whole sea change of understanding of Christianity. So that somebody who visited in the 9th century, a Christian in the 12th, they would have had a tough time understanding what was going on. But somebody who came in the 5th and visited a Christian in the West in the 9th, they would have said, yeah, this looks familiar. So Father Seraphim Rose's Survival Course helps tremendously to put all that in perspective and how we got to where we got today. Because if they don't get out of that paradigm, if they don't get out of that historical perspective, not only they're not going to understand what happened, but they're not going to understand Orthodoxy. I don't know if you all feel the same way, but that seems to be one of the biggest obstacles for them.
Well, yeah, and I think you touched on something like very important there, Father, which is like when I was going through and doing my analysis and trying to set out like this timeline, like one of the key questions is like who changed and like what changed, and you see like numerous changes going on in the Christian West at that time. Like I think Craig does an excellent job talking about that in his book, and also there are numerous other books from, I guess, I'll do the Uncut Mountain Press books first, but like for example, there's
Good idea.
The Latins set is excellent for this. Like if you compare the claims that we see today in the Roman Catholic Church about like ecclesiology and how the Bishop of Rome has universal jurisdiction over all Christians everywhere, and not just lay people, but all clergy as well, in basically all matters regarding faith and morals. We see that this is like not the structure of the church in the first 1,000 years. One of the examples that jumped out at me was during the Donatist Schism and Augustine's writings on that. Like here is a quote from the Errors of the Latin set where it says, St. Augustine is saying, let us suppose that those bishops who decided the case regarding the Donatists at Rome, let's suppose they were not good judges. There still remained a plenary council of the universal church in which these judges themselves might be put on their defense, so that if they were convicted of a mistake, their decisions might be reversed. So you have like not only St. Augustine, but numerous witnesses throughout the first 1,000 years saying that an ecumenical council of the universal church outweighs a decision that the See of Rome produces.
Yeah. Cassian, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm right there with you. I think so. Alex and I, we did a little bit of prep for his debate on Vatican I, and this book, obviously, it's not an Orthodox book, but it can be helpful. It was helpful for me that John O'Malley's book on Vatican I was helpful because a lot of people assume that there is just this Vatican, the Pope claiming who he is for like hundreds and hundreds of years, and people are all on the same page. But when you read this book, it's very clear there was so much pushback, even by the Western bishops at Vatican I. They didn't want, there were so many that didn't want him to claim immediate jurisdiction. There were so many that did not want him to claim infallibility, maybe only infallible when he's in a council or something, And so when you read this book, it's definitely helpful in kind of looking at the different models functioning in the West. And so even the Council of Constance is saying the council is over the Pope. And then, of course, just a little bit later, the Pope's like, well, no, not now. but they were even in the West had that little victory, and then it didn't last for more than 2 seconds. So
Yeah, it always kind of was a point of regret that at that time the Orthodox did not come through and say, let's support the conciliar structure up in the north, and instead went to Eugene, and the rest is history. But they were not driven by, unfortunately, they were driven by political motivations more than ecclesiastical. But that would have been a very different history. So
that's right. They had a lot of chances to even like change course even at the failed Council of Florence. And I think the one of the books that you guys all collaborate on, of course, Patrick and Father, the Acts of the Eighth Ecumenical Council. I mean, for me, this was really key. Studying 879 with Florence over like several years. I was waiting for this to be published. Obviously, like there wasn't a good there was no English translation yet. So this was a great gift, because you're trying to find the information on 879. There's all sorts of books on that, but this is really important. Connecting 879 with Florence and the kind of mindset St. Mark of Ephesus had going into Florence, and the hopes for a reunion from his side on how it could happen based upon the template here. So that was a big eye opener, because just St. Mark gets so trashed by the Latins in the West that he was like totally against reunion. But when you realize where he was coming from, like that's not true. Like he totally had a hope for some kind of reunion if that could have been the template.
Yeah, I just got to say, Cassian, I'm alarmed at the lack of Post-it notes that you have on your copy there. I don't know.
He's got 2 copies. See, he's got the nice one. Yeah. Yes, see.
Yeah. I bend my pages, unfortunately. I bend them and then write little notes, so I don't have the stickers like I should. So they can stay pretty. Yeah.
He devoured it, believe me. He devoured it. Yeah, that was a massive undertaking and a difficult undertaking. And thank God, a lot of people really contributed to that. If you don't understand what happened in 879, you will understand what happens in 1054. And this is kind of what was surprising to me, was that there was not more Orthodox kind of doubling down on that. And I still like, when we see this going on online, I think let's double down on this, because this is key. This is the period of alienation. This is the period where they go off and they do not follow their own popes, really. I mean, yes, the Pope was hedging, right? Craig can talk to this a lot. He was hedging. They always claim, maybe you should answer this, Craig. They're always saying, no, the Pope never endorsed it. No, this is a forgery of Photius. This is constantly what they're throwing at us. But he did. I mean,
it's sad that that's still repeated, because mainstream scholarship has rejected this categorically. I mean, anyone who's actually read Father Dvornik would not arrive at that conclusion whatsoever. He emphatically writes about how the council was accepted, and I think he argues even more strongly than I would that even after Pope John VIII, this council was accepted, and Photius was accepted, and that we still have the letter of Pope John VIII's acceptance, and that this letter accepts more than simply just Photius being restored. It accepts the work of the council. And there's more on this, because there's untranslated letters that aren't in Dvornik, because there's a letter to that Pope John VIII writes to Photius, and there's also a letter he writes to the Emperor Basil. And this is in light of the fact that he's essentially temporarily given jurisdiction in Bulgaria as part of this deal to accept this council. So there are issues like this which get ignored polemically, but of course they accepted this council. And I think the most important part of this that often gets ignored is an appendix to the minutes of that council, which is the authenticity of the letter of Pope John VIII to Photius, where he rejects the filioque. And so this is the context behind this council and its work. And there is a critical case, a textually critical case made that we could even date this letter to a very specific point within a few months and in the year 880. And it's just not my published work, but also as cited there's been other scholarship that accepts the authenticity of this letter as well. But this gets ignored in apologetics polemics because, and I hope tonight we've got a lot of new blood here. A lot of apologetics has been based on open source stuff and arguments from the late 1800s and early 1900s between Roman Catholics and Anglicans, and we haven't got past that. And there's been in recent years, particularly in this century, very important works have never been translated that are now in English and becoming part of the discourse. Obviously, the Acts of the Eighth Council are part of this. In fact, I was reading an unpublished article that's pending editing for peer review from a really big scholar, and quoted therein, it surprised me, but sort of didn't surprise me. You quoted the Eighth Ecumenical Council from the original Greek, but rendered the English from the uncut, non-impressed edition, because that's the only English translation. And that's typical scholarship. Even if you're citing the original, you will take whatever the popular English translation is and use that. And if you do any changes, you say, and I made changes to this translation. And so thanks to what Gregory here has done, thanks to Father Richard Price and his translation, so many things that weren't part of the discourse because it wasn't available to people are now part of the discourse. But now it's going to force people to update their understandings of a lot of these things past the Anglican and Roman Catholic paradigm. And I think that's why Orthodoxy is really starting to win the day, at least intellectually. We have a lot of groundwork to do at the parish level and things like this. But what we're going to start seeing unfold next is the Filioque itself. Not just increased validation of letters like John VIII's appendix of the Eighth Ecumenical Council, but even Roman Catholic scholars like Father Giulio Maspero arguing convincingly that the West did not believe in double procession. And we see that on screen.
There you go.
Where this is stuff where mainstream Roman Catholic apologists, I don't know why people trust them when they're consistently wrong, but they'll say, no one has this. This is a crazy idea. No one really believes this stuff. But this is mainstream scholarship. And this is why, though I don't hinge too many of my arguments on a line of reasoning like this, but the joint commissions between the Roman Catholics and the Orthodox, whatever the merits of these sort of ecumenical dialogues, the scholarship and bishops, the Roman Catholic Church, are well aware of this. They're well aware that the original doctrines and teachings of the church are the Orthodox Church. And so what we start seeing when there's a critical interaction, the Roman Catholic side with this, is a sort of papacy of the gaps and filioque of the gaps, everything the gaps, because they just don't have the full-fledged doctrine. We have Orthodox ecclesiology. It's in the councils and the canons, right? The very formative documents that show us how the church operates. I mean, that's what the councils and canons are literally about. Have the Orthodox ecclesiology and the Orthodox doctrines, but they don't have are the Roman Catholic doctrines. These require inferences and epistemic goalpost shifting, like doctrines of development and things like this. We don't have to make those sort of arguments because Orthodoxy is actually patristic and in those formative documents. And so this will increasingly come to light as the scholarship of Maspero and the conciliar minutes get increased exposure, and there's more work on these things.
Yeah, and I think it's just like worth emphasizing exactly how uncontroversial a lot of the claims that we're making are. Like both, as Craig and Cassian both said, like you can go to Roman Catholic scholars, and because I have like the quote pulled up from Dvornik here, where he says about the agreement of the Pope to the Council of Constantinople for Photius's rehabilitation. He says that the patriarch was reinstated without begging the fathers for mercy. Those who refused to acknowledge him were excommunicated, and all the synods held against Photius were annulled. All this was put down in the synodal decrees. Therefore, all this was agreed to by John VIII, referring to his letter. So no other conclusion is logically tenable. And this is like the premier, like this is their guy, the Roman Catholic scholar on this issue. And I think the more jarring thing for me on the Eighth Ecumenical Council was the concessions that Dvornik makes in this book, where he says the Eighth Ecumenical Council was not included among ecumenical councils by the Roman Church from 880 until the beginning of the 12th century, until that time, the two churches were in perfect agreement on this point. It was only as a result of the canonists' extraordinary oversight at the end of the 11th century that this council reappeared in the list of ecumenical councils. This is referring to the 869
council.
Yes, not the 879 council. But it says Canon 22, forbidding laymen to interfere with episcopal elections, which was discovered by the canonists of the Gregorian period, mainly contributed to the popularity of the council in the West and facilitated the canonists' misrepresentation. He calls it a misrepresentation. He's saying that they lied. They knew that it represented something else, and they presented it in a way that to say something that it does not actually say. And these are Roman Catholic scholars. These are not Orthodox scholars.
And it's worth adding again, and we've covered this in a previous it's actually Orthodox Ethos video, which is, and it's covered in Dvornik, that Roman Catholic canon law up to 1917 include canons from 879, 880. How did they get there if they did not accept this council? I mean, this more than 1,000 years. Up to 1917. So this is something where it shouldn't even be controversial. I think the real intellectual discussion is, on what basis did the Roman Catholic Church accept these canons and neglect some of the others? They accept 2 and not 1. And this is something that's covered, for example, in Rise and Fall of the Papacy and the Excursus in Canon Law. But the West developed a notion of canonical, like, line item veto, which then hinged everything upon what canons the Pope would use and disuse. And this has to do with canon law, and it's very specific. But what is, I would say, crystal clear and simple is they accepted the council, and which is why they accepted its canons. And so if it was, they only accepted Pope John VIII only accepted Photius's restoration, as the polemic is, then they would have never accepted the canons. They would have never accepted jurisdiction in Bulgaria. They would have never accepted the things that Alex here is alluding to. So it's just not compelling, and that's why scholarship never takes this tact. But you'll see it quoted on blogs and things, and so people will say this, and it's for this very reason. Because a deal was struck between East and West when the very problems that divide East and West now became first recognized. So when they first recognized that the Filioque was becoming a dividing issue and papal ecclesiology was becoming a dividing issue, what was the agreement made that would prevent future problems? It was to accept Orthodox doctrine and Orthodox ecclesiology. That's what the first canon is, by the way. And who broke the agreement? The West. And so it makes it very simple as to what went wrong. It's not an esoteric question. I feel very sorry for people which can't read all these history books and get to the nitty gritty. But you know what? You don't need to be particularly brilliant. There's an agreement made. The side that breaks the agreement is in the wrong. It's not very complicated.
And this is important.
Go ahead,
it's important. Yeah, 1 second, Cassian. Just want to say it's really important. The hierarchy is kept. I mean, what happens is, you get into these debates, they get off on tangents, they get off on secondary things. They constantly talk about pastoral issues, moral issues, and, which is a lot more fudgeable. But for our seekers out there, because this is what we're doing tonight, we're not doing it for the Orthodox. We're talking about things that those who want to discern the truth of Orthodoxy between Orthodox and Catholicism. What you have to keep in mind is understanding there's a hierarchy to things. And obviously dogma and ethos are inseparable, but dogma is the revelation, right? And so that's the cornerstone. That's the let's say the boundaries around which we then live within Christ and in the church. So you can't get those wrong. And if you get them wrong, then you will have the ethos and the spiritual life wrong. So first and foremost, who is Christ? What is the church? And so if these things are wrong, foundational ecumenical councils, decisions about the Trinitarian theology, it doesn't matter. All the other stuff, right? It's all downstream. So that's why that's why we spend so much time at Come On Press publishing all these books to show that understand the order of things, understand the hierarchy of things, understand what comes first, and you'll have clarity going forward in history and in theology and in spiritual life. If you don't do that and you focus on what the the enemy or the apologists who are, trying to win the debate, if you focus on that, you're going to be at sea. But go ahead, Cassian. Forgive me for cutting you off.
Oh, no, that's all good points. I was simply just adding to the conversation about 879. And at Florence, the Western bishops had completely forgotten about the council. Like, they didn't have the Acts. They couldn't read it. They were asking for the Acts from St. Mark of Ephesus. Like, do you have the Acts? Because we haven't even, we didn't even know about this council. They just completely forgot about it.
Wow.
And so
I didn't know that.
How do you even have a valid council at that point when that's what you're building it upon? So and they end up not, I don't believe they even are able to read the Acts. They just kind of forget about it after that request. And so to me, it's just, I know there's a big debate about how Florence was accepted. Oh, you Orthodox accepted it, and then you retroactively didn't. There's obviously big debate about that. I've got opinions, but even just from the starting point, they're not even reading the Acts of that reunion. And so how can you even move the council forward with true authenticity? I'm not really sure how you do that.
And being that you brought it up, when it comes to the reception of Florence, this is a totally unserious argument. Nicaea 2, and for what it's worth, Concile 879-880 bring up that you need pentarchic reception, which is not just the patriarch, it's their synods. So you need the councils and the synods of bishops belonging to those patriarchates accepting these councils. That very transparently did not exist in Florence. Not only because St. Mark Ephesus himself was a legate and one of the patriarchs of Constantinople was dead, we have the issue of when at least 3 patriarchates received the legates back. Both the legates and the synods themselves disowned the work of the council. And in the Reception Council of Jerusalem in 1443, there's people that claim that, oh, well, that's a forgery. Well, believe it or not, our earliest manuscript is in 1450 or 1451. And so, by ancient history standards, that'd be incredible. Obviously, that's not ancient history anymore by the 1400s, which is why something from 1451 still exists. But if it's a forgery and it pretty much pre-exists the fall of Constantinople, what kind of forgery is that, right? It starts becoming, I would say, a historically untenable argument. So anyone who argues that Florence was really received by the Orthodox and then non-canonically rejected just simply doesn't understand the canons. It's a very ignorant claim. And people making those claims to you, dear audience, are objectively trying to mislead you because they should know better. They know that Mark Ephesus was the legate. They know the Patriarch Constantinople died. And so the fact that they didn't have at least even all the legates accepting at the council itself, let alone those legates have to go back and have their synods accept. And I'll pose one more thing. If this is not true, then why isn't Constable 861 an ecumenical council when the papal legates accepted it? Because for accepting it, they got excommunicated 2 years later. So then they go, well, no, because the Pope didn't accept the work of his legates. He has to make sure that he really agrees with it. Well, why wouldn't that be true of other patriarchs, right? Because it is. That's the point. So that's a claim, a polemical claim made by the Roman Catholic side that's extremely ignorant. It just has to stop.
So we've talked a little bit about, I want to make sure we cover a lot of different topics. We could go down these rabbit holes and spend the next 2 hours, but we need to also talk about some other things because there's a variety of things people are encountering on their way to examining orthodoxy. So we did talk about on my agenda here, the ignorance of church history, a big part of that. So we're going to point to some books. I want to hear from you as well. If you got some real gems, if people really want to go deep and understand church history, what should they read? We'll go around real quick and you give us the top 2, top 3, and I've got some more after that. But we also have, in a more popular level, what I encounter all the time on people who are not scholars, not going deep, because there's a lot of different people out there, right? So we're not just talking to the scholars. But just to begin with, I just posted this. I post it all the time and it never fails. The word Catholic itself is not even understood. The word Catholic itself is not understood by the vast majority of Roman Catholics. And I love, putting out there Florovsky's wonderful examination and explanation of that. Because one of the biggest arguments is, well, Orthodoxy can't be the true church because it's not geographically universal. Look at us. We're 2 billion. We're the true church. So anybody want to jump in and just give 2 cents on that? Why that is one of the dumbest arguments against the church, and it's just doesn't even understand what the word means. And go ahead, Ben, if you want to.
I think it's just obvious why that would be a bad argument. I mean, was the church around the entire world when it began? Like look at this. What did it automatically spread to every single continent, every single city right at the beginning in the blink of the eye? Was the church not the church then? I mean, this just seems like such a simple argument to debunk.
Yeah,
I don't know how much more needs to be said about that, but it's right there. It's low hanging fruit.
And at the end of time, will it be over the whole world, or will it be the woman chased into the desert and a remnant, as Florovsky also says? So it's so low tier, but it is something you counter all the time, right? And people just kind of go with it. I think it's just a way to just avoid even looking at orthodoxy. And this is something you brought up, Cassian, is that there's just a desire, just to not. It's just kind of like almost a psychological, like they don't want to go there. Is that what were you saying earlier when we were discussing things?
I was saying that for Protestants that are seeking Orthodoxy or Roman Catholicism, sometimes they can get hooked on the papacy really fast because it's kind of like a Protestant argument where you're like, the Pope is Peter and the bishops are the apostles. And, Protestants oftentimes are in this kind of either or. It's either this or it's that. And that's how they think about all sorts of things related to theology. And so when we come in with the Orthodox position that Peter is an icon and that Peter is represented throughout all of Orthodox ecclesiology, of course, the bishop sits on the chair of Peter. The bishop is high priest. And you can take all the typological arguments in the New Testament, Old Testament. Peter's the new Eliakim. Peter's all, this happens in Catholic theology all the time. Scott Hahn's made it extremely popular. But you can take even some of those typologies and just say, well, yeah, but we just apply this to the bishop, or we see this in the patriarchs, whether that be the Patriarch of Antioch or Patriarch of Rome. And so it can be difficult for people to think of Peter as being applied in more than one way. And so it's just easier to think of, the Pope is sola Peter, or mostly Peter. That's kind of my experience with interacting with people. It just takes a little bit longer for them to see the Orthodox perspective of ecclesiology.
Mm-hmm.
I think with the papacy, I think it rises and falls with the papacy. The pun actually not intended, because people want that epistemic certainty. And the papacy just doesn't really address that. Like, well, how do you know what true doctrine is unless there's someone infallible? Well, for one, there's only two statements which all Roman Catholics agree are infallible to begin with. They don't have an infallible list of infallible statements. They don't have an infallible list of even ecumenical councils. So other than those two things, you don't have sureness of anything, quite frankly. And as for the contents of these infallible statements and these councils, there's not an agreement even what within those infallible documents is the actual infallible section. So you really just don't know anything. It's just not a doctrine with any real practical import, let alone, I would say, studying this historically with any historical existence until the 9th century. And so people can make philosophical arguments and novel biblical interpretations all day, and they could sound great to you. But I could say with all confidence, this historically did not exist until the 9th century. So if it just didn't historically exist, why would we take this very serious?
Yeah, I think even in the state of the modern Roman Catholic Church, we have statements from Pope Leo that basically says he could change anything on a whim. Me and Alex, we covered this on a show not that long ago. This was a statement here. He said the entirety of our faith, doctrine, worship, morality, etc., is not static but dynamic. It develops and is more deeply understood by the church over the centuries under the guidance of the Holy Spirit. We interpret it in Jesus' name. So this all changes. Like this is just, like you said, Craig, it's kind of just like sola Pope. This is all it is. It doesn't really provide any solid foundation for epistemology if it's just consistently shifting. And he says, well, I can change it when I want. Morals, doctrine, all of it could be changed.
Yeah, and I think it just goes to show that Catholicity, this is not something that is just raw numbers alone, right? Because if we take that criteria, what is the fastest growing Christian group today? Well, the fastest growing Christian group today is Pentecostals in Africa, right? So, I mean, if we're going to go by that criteria, that puts you in a very odd position, right? So I think like the arguments that Craig is making from like continuity, just like from my background, those speak to me like very loudly and clearly. In this, according to this numbering of Saint Cyprian's letters in this edition by St. Vladimir's Press, it's letter 33, where Saint Cyprian basically says that every bishop is the fullness of the episcopacy, and that every bishop is a Peter. So he says that in setting out the place of honor for the bishop and the ruling principle of his church in the gospel, our Lord speaks these words to Peter. And he applies Matthew 16 in the keys to every single bishop. And he says, like, from this principle, the ordination logically follows of each bishop in temporal succession, and thus the ruling principle of the church. So the fullness of the episcopacy is in each bishop, and it's throughout all of the bishops. There is no one super bishop. And we know with Saint Cyprian, he went to bat with the Pope frequently. He's one of the best examples, I think, of showing that that Vatican I ecclesiology did not exist. And he's an ante-Nicene witness as well. And there was one more thing that I thought was probably important to emphasize that Craig and Cassian were both touching on, which is like this enormous gap between what you see between Roman Catholic online apologetics and what Roman Catholic scholars are saying. Yeah. Like, we have nothing to be afraid of to go to a source like John O'Malley, like Cassian said, where it's in the subtitle of the book, The Council and the Making of the Ultramontane Church. Like, he's explaining that the church changed. And if you go through and you look at like the different reformations that the West had, you can see that it changed multiple times, which it kind of makes sense, you know, when you have a background like mine. Well, okay, you have some lies that you made up at some point, these misrepresentations of this canonists. Well, now you have two options. You're either going to come clean and admit that you lied, or you have to keep on lying to cover up the first lies. And I think what we see is the latter, is that they end up adding more and more lies. Like you see it with the pseudo-Isidorian decretals, the donation of Constantine, and the reliance on these documents, and further reliance on fraud. It breeds the need for more changes as you go on. That's why you see like the Counter-Reformation, the Council of Trent, you see Vatican I Council, and I think, Father, your work on the Vatican II Council, like this, the title is so apt, the ecclesiological renovation of Vatican II. It's such an in-depth study on this, and I think it's very good. If anybody that's interested in really like the full ramifications of Vatican II, I think should look into Father Dr. Peter Here's work on this.
Thank you. I love when you call me Father Doctor. I feel like I'm in Romania. I've been transformed into a Romanian. It's good.
It's excellent work. You see changes throughout, and it makes sense because they're not on the foundation of the rock. They're on shifting sand.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the plug. And I wanted to say, as you were talking, and earlier we talked about the so-called forgeries of St. Photius, which are, don't exist. But this is a whole volume 2 of the well-known Errors of the Latins. Wow. I mean, we're talking, it's at almost 550 pages of just either erroneous texts or mostly forgeries. And we know that these are accepted by scholars as actual forgeries, as opposed to the wishful thinking of the critics of St. Photius. And yet the same ones who are full of forgeries, and that's how they built their papacy from the 8th, 9th century on, politically as well as ecclesiastically. They have no shame but to call out St. Photius as as doing forgery. It's pretty hard to stomach and watch, but it happens. Cassian, they would come back to Alex and say, well, yeah, it's not lies. It's just development of doctrine.
Yep.
And we're good with that. What's the Orthodox answer? Why is development of doctrine not possible and not acceptable?
Well, when you use that word development, they'll always be like, well, they associate it with any kind of change. So they'll like, well, the Orthodox liturgy experienced some change, or you guys have experienced some change in this and this and this. It's like when we talk about development of doctrine, we have to be very clear about what's the philosophical underpinnings of these models. It's not just like we saw some change happen, right? So, I mean, for me, it's just being able to see the same kind of ecosystem. I use this analogy all the time because I'm kind of like a biology, ecology kind of guy. Like, you're going to see some inside change within a forest. And but the change is still going to be consistent with the ecosystem. Like it's still a rainforest, or it's still a desert, or it's still this. The best way that I could help myself when I was on this journey from Roman Catholicism into Holy Orthodoxy was that, okay, I am seeing some changes on both sides, and to some extent, but I'm seeing like desertification, like an actual like ecosystem change in areas of doctrine and areas of just thinking. Like the mindset just changes. It looks more Protestant, or it just looks strange. It doesn't look like what you see in the early church in certain categories. And that was for me. I mean, the best way I thought of it was, if you have change within an ecosystem and the ecosystem's still the same thing, that's orthodoxy. It's still the same. It's still the same constitution that Christ gave.
Yeah, this is much simpler than people think. And I'll cut right to the chase. You know, John Henry Newman, the cardinal who came up with doctrinal development, and he's canonized the Roman Catholic Church for this, not for pretty much any other aspects of his life. And in defending this doctrine that he devised, his point was there was a time where saints and Mary weren't venerated, and there's a time that it was essentially an innovation. And this is something that Roman Catholic scholars today, Father Thomas Guarino and others, have pointed out. Yes, this is what Newman taught. We Orthodox just simply don't believe this. We believe in terminology that's developed and things like this, but the doctrine has once and for all been delivered to the saints, as Jude 1:3 says. And like, for example, dated before the year 125, scholarship saying first or very early 2nd century are two mainstream documents with reference the intercessions of the Theotokos, right? So the historical basis for Orthodox doctrines exist. We don't have to make these appeals to development. This is something that's caught guys like Pastor Gavin Ortlund, Dr. Gavin Ortlund, by surprise. Like, yes, art historians recognize that ante-Nicene, there was all sorts of iconography. And there's been no response to a video that I helped produce, the Harmony channel. It's got 350,000 views or more at this point, where we show, and it's documented before in the 1st century because it's in Pompeii. So we know when that volcano exploded. We have iconography into the 1st century. We don't have to make appeals to doctrinal development like Trent Horn and others are making to try to defend the Roman Catholic view of Nicaea II from the actual view of Nicaea II, that when we say it's apostolic, it's because they actually did it. They actually taught it.
Right.
So that's why I said I wanted to cut to the chase. We don't believe in development, not because words can't develop or iconographic practices can develop or even ascetic and prayer practices. I argue in some respects, we have improved a lot of these practices, maybe because we need it, because we're becoming so worldly. A lot of these things have improved. That being said, it's not that prayers are new or the content of these prayers are new or the content of the liturgy is new. None of this stuff's new. But when Roman Catholics speak of development, they actually do think it's new. They think there's a time there wasn't prayers of the saints, there wasn't icons, and there's a time that was. And all I could say is for those inquiring, if you're a faithful Roman Catholic, why would you accept this idea?
Right.
And if you are a Protestant, thinking of the Roman Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church, why not just stay Protestant? Because maybe Protestantism is the end game of doctrinal development. Maybe they developed the right way. If we already know that's wrong for them, that it's an innovation, how does this vindicate the Roman Catholic view? I really think Cardinal Newman has done great damage to a intellectually vigorous defense of what is otherwise a respectable and pretty old belief system. It's just not as old as Orthodoxy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a bit jarring when you see someone like an Eric Ybarra team up with Ortlund and say, icon veneration didn't happen. The Dormition of the Holy Theotokos didn't happen. Like there's no.
We have an empty
record
tomb
for it.
from the 1st century.
Yeah, it's
Right.
a bit jarring
Yes.
even for Roman Catholics to hear people like Eric Ybarra say that. But he loves that kind of argument because that's what he then pivots to the papacy. Well, this is how we can make the papacy work.
Mm-hmm.
And he does this time and time again, and that's his main way of convincing people. Like the data doesn't have to be there. We just have to show that, we've got it, and we've got the machine or the mechanism or the engineered system to make it all going.
Taking this and applying it now post-schism, and even in the last 50 years since Vatican II, don't we see just this mentality? There's a zillion other things we could talk about. We often don't talk about as Orthodox, and it's in this book here, the first 150 pages dedicated to this development around the sacraments or the spiritual life. Father Seraphim Rose talks about in his Orthodox Survival course. He talks about this incessant, spirit of progress and the heliastic mentality, the search for utopia. All of that is caked into the Western mentality, which grew up even before the Reformation in people like Joachim Fiore or others. And I think a lot of times well, we should talk a lot more about that, which nobody knows about, and shows, the disintegration of very, very basic things in the church. I'll just give you the one that I'm most familiar with, and that is the unity of the sacraments, the unity of the mysteries. They, to this day, and this is actually something I found in my PhD thesis, which was really eye-opening, because there were Lutheran and Roman Catholic scholars trying to bring this back at Vatican II. It never happened. And they wanted to get back to the unity of the mysteries. And they always said the Orthodox have kept it. They've never abandoned the three mysteries of initiation. They can never be, overlooked, right? It's baptism, chrismation, and communion together. That's how it used to be in the West. And they abandoned that in the Middle Ages. And they did it practically first, and then they did it theologically, because they had already lived it practically, right? They did it seemingly on a good basis, like the bishop has to come and chrismate or confirm. So that took years or months or years. So they had a experience of that for generations, that, well, you'll be baptized, but then later on you'll be chrismated, and later on you'll commune. Well, then that developed to years in the Middle Ages. And then they come back and they theologically try to justify it all and say, well, that's just the way it's supposed to be. And then they end up in Vatican II with a ecclesiology based upon that experience going back generations, right? And then they can extend now baptism outside of Catholicism to the Protestant world in and of itself, per se, right? Not as economia, but just per se. All of that in my research, my theological research, showed that it goes deep. The innovations, the departures, the disintegration, it is a long process. And so none of that exists in Orthodoxy. I mean, not only on a micro, but on a macro level, we never had an Enlightenment. We never had a Reformation. We never had Renaissance, right? We never went through all these ages and processes of dissolution, philosophically, theologically, culturally. And so you've got to get out of that paradigm if you're going to understand Orthodoxy. Right?
I totally agree. I think as a father to a young son, the idea that my son couldn't commune, that he couldn't partake in the sacrament, efficacious to his salvation, because there's some better theological and philosophical paradigm maybe out there, is crazy. This is when you take ivory tower pie in the sky stuff and you ignore what you see right in front of your face. The universal practice of infant communion, where we have popes in the 4th century saying that it's necessary for salvation. And you have, I forget which name the Pope, but in the early 1900s, an encyclical admitting, yes, this was a universal practice. But we act like, I guess it's no big deal that out of the 1 billion Roman Catholics, there's maybe 30 million Eastern Catholics that don't do it. So then it's okay. When we have millions upon millions, into the hundreds of millions probably, of Christians that are being denied what they believe is a absolutely necessary sacrament for salvation. Quite frankly, that's a kind of abuse if you really believe that it's efficacious. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not the show for the lack of grace in their sacraments. That's another issue. But the point is, even if you conceded that they did that, this level of abuse, it's not just, oh, well, that's a faulty discipline. No, this is a problem for about 800 years now in the Roman Catholic Church. And every single child brought up in this church is exposed to this. And one has to wonder, how could something so fundamental as the Eucharist be done that wrong?
Yeah.
And there's a certain point is, well, if you have to defend that through the system of development, and then faith and morals are immutable, but the doctrines and disciplines aren't, and all the sort of categories of thought they come up with, there's a certain point where it just comes out as special pleading and totally disconnected from every Christian's reality in worship.
It means the life comes after the thought. But life and revelation came, life came, and then there was the defense of that life. The councils didn't create a doctrine. They just defended what was experienced from the beginning. They have it all backwards. They have the cart before the horse, right?
I mean, because like my historical view when it comes to, let's say, the bishop giving chrismation in the West, I believe that might have been at least 4th century, could have been earlier, could have been one of their oldest traditions there is, quite frankly. It's made reference in one of the very early papal letters. It's not translated yet. But that said, people don't understand every small village back then had its own bishop. When the Donatists and I'll say the Orthodox Catholics had councils against one another in North Africa. So we're not talking about like this hugely populated area in Roman Empire. We're talking hundreds on each side because every village had a bishop. So could that bishop do the chrismation? Of course he can, because he was there even in a small village. But when this declined in time, when there became less and less bishops, I mean, there's less bishops on earth now that there's hundreds of millions of Orthodox Christians than there were in the Roman Empire. So this has been I think, bad development that has occurred where we have less and less bishops. But what the West did is then they changed their sacramentology because they forgot, how this became a problem for themselves. And that's the real issue. While in the East, because we never had that tradition, it just never became a problem.
Yeah, it's a theological error in worship. That's where I try to go that direction now, because Catholics oftentimes will pivot to it's just like discipline that can change. But if you acknowledge it's a theological error in worship, that's got a lot of heat behind it. Like, you have changed your understanding of worship to delay communing infants because you're saying that they cannot give adequate adoration or worship to God.
Mm-hmm.
And
really
and
good
it
point.
was Robert Taft's the one who said, the liturgical scholar in the Vatican, who said that it was a major magisterial reversal because Pope Innocent I is the one who connected baptism with John 6 and communing infants in their salvation, and that this was stated at a very high magisterial level within, the Western way of thinking.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it all ties into what we were talking about earlier with the separation of baptism and chrismation, because it's really the core concept that drove this later innovation. I mean, you can just read the USCCB guidelines and their defense of this practice of delaying communion for infants. It says, following recognition by the Holy See, the USCCB has decreed that the age for conferring the sacrament of confirmation in the Latin Rite diocese of the United States would be between the age of discretion. So this is the concept they've introduced, the age of discretion. They got to be able to tell the difference between the Eucharist and food, right? So that's the line of delineation there. You got to be able to tell the difference between regular food and, the Eucharist. So this is considered about the age of 7, between the age of 7 and about 16 years of age. So this is their range here. So this concept of being able to this is the prerequisite. You have to be able to distinguish between food and the Eucharist. This actually plays a larger this actually creates a larger issue for them when it comes to the mentally disabled, which we were discussing with Father Stephen DeYoung in many. Well, this is actually just USCCB guidelines. If they are unable to tell the difference, if they are mentally disabled to that level. It's not saying everybody who's mentally disabled, according to their own system of canon law, should be denied communion. That's not what I'm saying. And some priests might actually just say, we're not doing that. Like, we might we're just going to do
normal people. Yeah.
Right. But exactly. Normal people. Yeah. Good for them. But according to the USCCB guidelines, if they are mentally disabled to the point where they cannot distinguish between food and the Eucharist, they cannot receive communion. They can't. Their entire, I covered this on my show, their entire pamphlets walking through the Roman Catholic teaching on whether or not people, they use the word retarded. It's in the pamphlet. It's like the retarded and communion. Can they receive communion? Can they receive this? So this concept, like you were saying, Father, of putting this thought before the practice is devastating to the real life of the church. It's playing out in real time. And once, like, not even a small change, but one change has infinity downward effects. And I'm sure we're going to discuss that more when we get into some of the liturgical changes and things like this.
That's why, again, it's so important to understand that if you change even one iota, the Lord says, right? And we have it right there with homoousios, right? And then, so the fathers saw that if you change it at that level, then over time, and now we're 2,000 years later, you're going to have a massive departure. And you're going to have a massive departure ultimately all the way down to the granular level of ethos. And that's exactly what's happening. We're talking about very, very, heavy basic issues around moral life that people are confused about in the West and have abandoned in the West. Well, that is ultimately, the roots are in changes in our theology with the Trinity and the Christology. So that's why you start there and you understand these things, and then everything else goes downhill from there. We've talked about, we don't have that much time. I want to have a lot of time for questions if we have questions. I don't see a ton of questions, but if we start having questions, I want to stop and take them because that's a big part of why we're doing this. But we talked about ignorance of church history. We talked about some basic fallacies of understanding. We talked about their misconceptions. Let's talk a little about their objections, what we hear given as objections to kind of keep people from not going deeper into looking into Orthodoxy. And Cassian gave me some before we started, and I'll just go with those, and you can add more into the play. And you can also go back to things if you think we haven't covered everything. But one of the things is Orthodoxy is divided. We've got a schism between the two local churches of Constantinople and Russia, and therefore it's hopelessly divided. It's hopelessly divided. You need a pope. You guys are always going to be divided, and that proves that you're not the church. There's no unity. So let's start with Alex, and then we'll just go around and see what's the answer to that, and why is that a misleading argument?
Well, if we are divided, then I guess the church of the first 1,000 years also was divided, because you see, like, different temporary schisms of like various degrees. You see that all the time within the first 1,000 years. Some of them, like the Rome Antioch schism regarding the bishop Meletius, and I forgot what his competitor was now, but the idea is that at the end of that schism, Rome conceded that they were wrong, and they recognized that Saint Meletius would be the rightful bishop, and they went through the line of Meletius for who is to be the rightful bishop of Antioch. So I mean, if this is some disqualifying problem for us today, what do we have to say about the church for the first 1,000 years? You have to concede so much. And I think Michael Welton, in his book, Two Paths, he gives like really good treatment to this in like plain language. I think, I know, Father, you mentioned, book recommendations maybe towards the end, but I think that's probably one of the main ones I would recommend, is that it's such a plain language and for the average reader. After that, I think Craig Truglia's book is excellent. He goes into a bit more detail. I think, having those foundations from Michael Welton's book helps to put those things in context. But this is the exact same thing you see also in a Second Temple Jewish tradition, where you have the Sanhedrin and like a main synod, a main council in Jerusalem, and then you see different synods throughout the Jewish diaspora. And in Alexandria, it was literally called a synod because they spoke Greek, and that's the Greek word for it. So like the ecclesiology that you see today in Holy Orthodoxy, this is, again, not some sort of development. This goes back even to Second Temple Jewish tradition. So this is like a long line of continuity that we have. So it is a horrible objection, I think, but there you go. There's the answer for it.
And I'd add, if someone wants to not read books, they should, especially read my book.
Yes.
Would be in the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, liturgy St. Basil. It's in the liturgies. We pray for peace in the churches. And so why was Roman communion with churches praying this every single liturgy? If this wasn't something that was just not a big deal, it was expected, the fact that you pray for it every liturgy.
Mm-hmm. Right. Cassian?
Yeah, praying for the end of all schisms. Well, I mean, there's plenty of examples in the first millennium of these being an issue. I mean, the Spanish bishops were out of communion with the Pope for a couple hundred years, but they're in communion with other Western bishops, so which one's the right one? You see this after the 1054 schism. You see what? The Pope suspending all the priests' faculties in England for a bit. I mean, you see all these kinds of irregular, these abnormalities, and people just look at history through the lens of Vatican I, and they don't read all of this messiness. And for us as Orthodox, sometimes it's actually the messiness that preserves the Orthodoxy, instead of everything being as Saint Gregory the Pope the Great warns against all of our chips being just moved to one person. So if that one person falls, the whole church falls. Instead, this messiness is actually how we resolve the issues. I mean, I think Roman Catholicism could be helped by a little bit of this kind of messiness, where certain bishops would not be in communion with the German bishops right now. It actually might push the ball forward for them, right? Like, why am I in communion with this German bishop who's a flat out heretic? Why am I celebrating mass with him?
Yeah.
But they all go through the Pope and say we're all in kumbaya joy, but it's just not the reality.
Well, that's a good point that you bring up, because if they had the ecclesiology of the first millennium where the bishops could excommunicate each other, maybe some of these issues would be solved in the Roman Catholic Church. But instead, what do we see? What's their form of unity, actually? I mean, it's a false unity based off of just submission to the Roman pontiff. That's all it is. It's not based upon any truth that they hold in common. So look at the uniate groups that they have now. In the Roman Catholic Church. Look at the uniate groups that they've accepted into communion with them. I mean, the Syro-Malabar uniates are literally commemorating Mar Nestorius in their liturgies. They have an anaphora to Nestorius. You can look at in the ordinariate. I mean, they're commemorating Protestant kings and these types of things. So I mean, it's what kind of unity are you really offering when it's really just anyone that wants to come into communion with us? Just like, it doesn't really matter what the views are. We're just going to, you just say you submit to the Pope and then you're good to go. We'll sign, seal, deliver. It's all good.
I think there's a really good point to be made that they have a facade of unity in contemporary Catholicism.
Yeah,
but when we talk about unity in Orthodoxy, we mean that when I go, as I've gone in many different countries, Greece, Romania, Serbia, America, the UK, wherever, Canada, wherever you go, all these different ethnic churches around the world and in America, you feel the same exact divine liturgy, the same exact spirit, the same exact mentality, you read the same exact books, you draw from the same sources. Whereas if you go to a Pentecostal charismatic gathering in Rome, and you go to a Trappist monastery in France, and you go to some unions, I mean, it is very different. It's not, you don't feel the same. Before I became Orthodox, I was going to these pro-life rallies, and there was tons of Roman Catholics who were charismatics, right? And they were going to do pro-life work. And that was like, they were more with the Protestants, one in their spirituality at those rallies. Then they had, when I started going and trying to look, traditional Latin Mass types, or over in even, more traditional monastic gatherings in Catholicism, it was like night and day. So true unity is not just an appeal to authority or an acceptance of an authority over you. It's a experiential, on the ground life in common. And so it's a total... the fact that they don't see that, they don't have a problem with their Pope blessing a massive charismatic gathering in Rome every year with that spirituality. Where is that? What is that? That is clearly 20th century from Protestantism that came into Catholicism. That has nothing to do with traditional Catholicism.
Yeah.
So they're good with that. They think it's like an addition, or it's a compliment, the more the merrier kind of approach to, which is very problematic from an Orthodox perspective.
Good point. And I think that speaks more to the spiritual side as well. Saint Dumitru Staniloae, in this book, Theology and the Church, he makes a really good argument about how, like, with the addition of the Filioque clause, like, eventually this change in their theology manifested in their ecclesiology. And instead of relying on the Holy Spirit to, like, bind the church together and to keep it as one body in the body of Christ, that they ended up relying on a man, a pope in order to maintain unity within the church instead of the Holy Spirit. So they subordinated the Holy Spirit in their theology, and it manifested as a subordination of the Holy Spirit also in their ecclesiology. And I think you see that just manifesting throughout the Roman Catholic Church throughout.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very disorienting. I mean, I was a Catholic for 13 years, and I thought I was kind of coming into the church of like Pope Benedict XVI and Joseph Ratzinger, and then it's very disorienting very fast, particularly if you're like in ministry and you're going to like retreats and conferences and monasteries. You see a lot of, I mean, you see wild stuff. I led a retreat at a Franciscan convent, and I asked them to be very strong on Catholic identity. And the nun begins having us pray Native American prayers, north, east, west, south. Then we go to mass, and there's a turtle, and there's a giant globe and stuffed animals on the altar. I mean, it was a train wreck of a retreat that I organized, but it was very jarring, and that's one example among many. And that's not like the main reason I became Orthodox. It wasn't because of abuses or corruptions or things like that. It was the truth. And but you find such a deep integration in Orthodoxy. It's like the most integrated version of Christianity that exists. And that's what I really tell Roman Catholics that are seeking, or Protestants that are trying to decide between the two. You will be like oriented towards reality. And you're not gonna, and if you become Roman Catholic, yeah, I mean, it might have some things that you like better than Protestantism, obviously, but it's still going to be quite disorienting, and you don't know what it's going to be like 100 years from now. And that's most of my Catholic friends who still talk to me about these sorts of things. That's the line that always gets them. Like 100 years from now, you don't know what Protestantism is going to look like. You don't know what Roman Catholicism is going to look like. You do know what Orthodoxy is going to look like.
That's a good point.
Like 100 years from now.
That's awesome. All right, let's talk about another thing that's kind of red herring. Biblical canon differs. What did you want to say with that, Cassian? Maybe you want to unpack that.
This objection has grown in popularity. I didn't really see it as much a couple of years ago, but I'm seeing it more and more and more. I think William Albrecht and other people kind of made it popular. And I think Protestants are actually making it popular too. I mean, I think I've heard more and more Protestants pick up on this, especially this year. And I mean, I know other people can comment on this and say wonderful things. My quick answer to that is, even when you have, let's say, people have slightly different opinions about the Deuterocanon, the second canon in Orthodoxy, we, from what I can tell, agree that doctrine is all coming from the whole list. So Protestants will think, because they're thinking of the canon in a different way than we are,
in a very exclusive way.
Yeah, in a very exclusive way. They don't think of it as a hierarchy where we, have a veneration of the Gospels and all that. And so it's like when we're talking about like First and Second Maccabees and these little details, for us, it's like even those who may just call First and Second Maccabees the readables, they still view that as a source of doctrine. So yeah, I think helping people along. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we cite hagiographies, we cite the prayers of the church, we cite hymnography, the liturgy. These are all authorities for us because it's something we all share. And so the qualitative difference in different kinds of scriptures doesn't pose the sort of systematic problems as it would within Protestantism.
Yes.
And among Roman Catholicism, their issue is because they hammered this out and made a canon in the 1500s, and then begs the question, if this really is a problem, then why wasn't this a problem for them for the first 1500 years before then? Right? And why were they in communion for the first 1,000 years of church, with a church that had a canon of Trullo that had these different canons? And so I will accept some of the blame for making people aware that this was something within Orthodoxy, but I also will say it's because Orthodoxy deals with the truth, and it's not problematic for us that we have this approach to canon. It's because of sort of artificial distinctions that they impose upon themselves that it's problematic to them. But it wasn't problematic in the early church, so why would it be today?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think that critique doesn't necessarily levy the same amount of like damage against us as it would for a Protestant when they're sola scriptura. If they don't have a normative authority that is interpreting the text, that is outside of the text, that is a living body of bishops, that causes a huge issue in their paradigm. And that was something that I had been talking about lately regarding epistemology. I mean, they don't necessarily have any way to have any access to any objective interpretation of anything within the scripture in their own paradigm. But for them to have an unauthoritatively defined canon, that actually does a lot of damage to their paradigm. It doesn't necessarily do it to us. I mean, but you can even look at, and I know this is slightly contested, but you could even look at the canons in the Confession of Dositheus, and it'll lay out a canon it's the Orthodox canon there. The only slight detail is it doesn't give a number to the Maccabees. That's left it just says the Maccabees. So do with that what you will. But they might be able to find, for instance, like the Georgians will have an additional Maccabee in a section called non-canonical. Sometimes they'll grab this and they'll try to make a big stink out of it. But that doesn't levy the same amount of damage to our paradigm as it does to yours, Protestants. And this is one reason, I don't know why my camera's bugging out. This is one reason why I personally don't like the you must have an infallible list of infallible books argument that Roman Catholics try to use. I don't think it's a very good argument. But I've always said that. That's something that hasn't changed. I still think that. I still don't think that's a good argument.
Yeah, I think what's important for Orthodox to remember on this topic is that we are supposed to use the language of the Holy Fathers. Protestants and Roman Catholics do not usually use the language of the Holy Fathers, especially when we're talking about, pre-9th century, right? So the way we see those fathers using the term canonical is like, these are the books that are permitted to be read during the liturgy. They're not talking about like what Protestants mean when they say, like, okay, these are the books where you can treat each sentence as some empirical truth proposition, and you can go through the book and like stack up and gather truth propositions and then rebuild Christianity from the ground up from the text of the Bible, right? That's not what the Holy Fathers meant when they were talking about a book that is canonical or not. And you see books held in various regards by different saints, like Saint Nikephoros of Constantinople has First Enoch on his list of books that are good to read like privately, personally, in your private study. Various Bible scholars have shown that there are many, many different canon lists in the first century, and that you need to have the church and this like judicial authority to be like, okay, like these are the ones that you're going to use. You, random parish over there, the one that's using the Epistle of Barnabas, you probably should stop using that in your liturgy, because there is evidence for these books in like the first few centuries being used in worship in some of these churches. So you need to have that standardization. And like, this is what the Holy Fathers mean when they're saying canonical. They don't mean some to use empiricism to deduce truths from a continuous text, right?
Let's move on to another objection. The objection of that the papacy is just so obvious, and of course you have to have the papacy. There's kind of two different things. You have to have the papacy if you're going to have any kind of authority. You guys are, without the papacy, you cannot figure out what you're doing. You're lost. You have no rudder, essentially. So what do you think about that? We'll start with Mr. Truglia.
The Orthodox have what the Roman Catholics call a magisterium, but we have a way of discerning doctrine. It's through consensus. This is something that they talk about explicitly in the Council of Crete. I was at a lecture a week or so ago where one of the attendees of the Council of Crete was making mention. This is not some polemic we've come up with to sort of like, oh, we got a way to know doctrine too, and it's not so vacuous. Like, no, this is something that the councils talk about. Our canonists are aware of it. The consensus of the saints, the consensus of the church on which councils we recognize. This is how we recognize doctrine. We don't need a fallible list of supposedly infallible statements that a pope made to know these things, as we already established. Other than two different infallible statements, the Roman Catholics don't have the surety. They don't have an infallible list of ecumenical councils.
Yes.
Because of that, they really don't even know if Trent's canon's correct, because it's not an infallible list. They don't have an infallible list of ecumenical councils, nor do they have an infallible understanding of what within the infallible ex cathedra statements is infallible, nor do we have infallible interpretations of those things. So it's kind of ridiculous. While we can know what the canon is because we know what every Orthodox church receives. We know what the doctrines are because we know what we pray everywhere. It's to be honest, if Roman Catholics or even Protestants to a degree were honest with themselves, they have the same thing. Protestants have a council for what their canon of scripture is. They just know they all have the same one, and there's something to that. It's a kind of consensus. And so it's just, we recognize that's how it works. We don't invent these different and competing forms of authority.
Yeah, it just St. Vincent of Lerone comes to mind. It's just the things that were believed everywhere, always, by all, right? This is something like, as Craig has been saying, this is one of those things I agree. We don't have to overcomplicate this, right? We have the liturgies, we have the writings of the Holy Fathers. We see the things that they all agree on, and we see that this is why we have spiritual fathers in the Holy Orthodox Church. And I think that's like, we emphasize it a lot more than these other traditions, like in Roman Catholicism and in Protestantism, because we see the faith as something that is received. It is passed down. You receive it from your spiritual father. This is like Father Deacon Ananias, who I'm sure the audience is familiar with, has been using this term lately, where he sees a lot of young guys doing like a sort of sola patristica, where they go throughout the Holy Fathers on their own with their own translations that they found, and they come to their own understanding of what the Holy Fathers are saying. That is not Orthodox. The Orthodox way is to receive this from your spiritual father, who will instruct you on how to understand what the Holy Fathers say. So it is so multidimensional in Holy Orthodoxy. So on one end, it is very multifactorial and maybe hard to boil down, but in essence, it's just the universal standard that we see in St. Vincent of Lerone.
Cassian?
Yeah, I have found, Orthodoxy to be very alive and living, and doctrine is not just like this. I mean, I view the phrase petrified as both an honorable term, because Pope Benedict XVI will say, the Orthodox were petrified, like stuck in the 9th century, and you hear this by Catholic historians, like that's an honor. But at the same time, I know what they mean by it, and they're saying that we're like frozen in the 9th century. And I just don't see that. I don't see that in church history. I don't see that in this moment. The Holy Spirit is guiding the church. Our bishops, our priests are guiding us, and we're experiencing a tremendous growth, I think, in our spiritual life. I mean, I know people that have come from all sorts of backgrounds, and what they experience in their growth in Christ and Holy Orthodoxy is just, it's profound. So you have it at, of course, the personal level, but it's also happening globally too. People in all sorts of countries are just wanting to become Orthodox. Like one guy, he was an atheist, like in where was it, Sweden or somewhere, like in the middle of nowhere, and he became Orthodox. So people are waking up, and it's happening. So I don't view us as being petrified or needing the papacy so that we're not stuck in the 9th century.
I always tell people they got to read St. Paisios or any other latest saints if they want to follow the ancient saints, because that's how it works. That's how the Lord determined it.
That's right.
He set it up that way. And as I like to say, because a lot of Orthodox don't know this, when we say in the monastery, when we say through the prayers of the Holy Fathers, that's what we get it, right? We get the liturgical practice for the monasteries. When the abbot or the higher monk says through the prayers of the Holy Fathers, they mean the monks of the monastery, the Holy Fathers of the monastery. So it's a living tradition in Orthodoxy. First and foremost, it's the living witness in every generation. And those have a witness and an authority because they're following the ones that have given it to them. And it doesn't work any other way. You can't study your way into an authoritative position in Orthodoxy. You can't jump and say, I'm now a professor. There was a famous professor who became a bishop who read only until the 9th century. Or I think maybe even earlier. He wanted to read nothing from the Holy Fathers after the 9th or 10th century. He went off into delusion. Like he started saying that Origen was a saint. Because that's not how it works in Orthodoxy. You've got to be connected to the living tradition. Both and, of course, right? It's not just one, but there's a hierarchy. And so it's very, very indicative that there was a huge revival in the 20s, 30s, 40s, Yves Congar and others. What were they doing? Going back to the fathers, right? Well, you don't need to go back to the fathers in Orthodoxy. That means you lost them somewhere. You got disconnected. You didn't have them in front of you. You're not a part of that living tradition. And the same thing with Reformation. We got to reform. It's the same exact mentality, just differently applied. Why do we got to reform something? We don't need to reform anything. We just need to live what's being passed down to us. So in both cases, if you have to have an aggiornamento, you have to have a return, you admit you don't have it. Otherwise, why do you have to return to it?
Right.
And of course, they didn't return to it. They returned to Aquinas, and they looked to the fathers through Aquinas. That's what happened in Vatican II. That's what I found in Congar when I read Congar. They were looking at Aquinas, and they were trying to figure out the fathers through Aquinas. Really, they weren't in the Cappadocians. They weren't in Maximus per se, right? They were always saying, well, what is our scholastic tradition? That's what defines, and Trent and the Middle Ages, that's what defines Catholicism. That's why they wanted to go liturgically back, because they knew that wasn't it, and they can't. It's impossible. When you lose it, you got to repent of it, right? You got to repent. You got to break with the fabricated version that has come down. All of ecumenism is built on a fundamentally ecclesiological heretical basis, that you can somehow merge the 100% Christ, which is the fullness, and there's only fullness. Christ is only fullness. He's not 99.9. He's only 100%. And you got to merge that now with something that's 99.2 or 5 or 10 or whatever they think they are. That means you got to merge Christ with something that's not theanthropic, because only Christ is theanthropic, and there is nothing missing in him. So you've got a fundamental misunderstanding in many ways, and it's creeping into some of our ecumenism in the Orthodox Church in a big way. And that's another discussion for another day. But let's go to another one. Eastern Catholicism is the answer. Hey, everybody, I know you're really drawn to Orthodoxy, they say, but I got a perfect answer for you. It's Eastern Catholicism. It's the middle way. Is it the royal path, the middle way? And why?
No, they're schismatics. They have everything we have, but they have the Pope. It's great. Why isn't it? But they're schismatics. That's, if that matters to you. A schism's a sin, and the reason we know they're schismatics is because that's how all those churches have historically been set up, with perhaps the exception of Ukraine, which is a little bit of a more complicated situation. If you get into the nitty-gritty of how all these union churches are set up, oftentimes it's non-canonical synods, sometimes started by a single laicized priest and things like this. And this is how the Uniate Church of Ethiopia, of Egypt, of how the Melkites were started with single-handed ordinations and stuff like this. And it's what legitimizes and regularizes all of them is simply because the Pope said it was okay, pretty much, to reduce it. I don't want to say this dismissively, but that's really how their ecclesiology works. And the only example one could have of this not occurring is in Ukraine, where because of Polish persecution, the Ukrainian majority, not all, but the majority of the Ukrainian synod entered communion with the Pope. But that is not most uniate jurisdictions. And so that's highly problematic. And by the time you have the issue of Ukraine, that's after 600 years of uniatism. Well, more than 550, but it's after 500 years or so of uniatism. And so for that reason, to say this is a solution, but with its an auspicious origin, I think should make it a non-starter.
Yeah, and really, uniatism this is just, you are not in communion with the Orthodox Church. Like, I'm sorry, you are in communion with the Roman Catholic Church. And at the risk of sounding maybe slightly harsh to my friends in the BizCath community, because I have dear friends that I like a lot that are like Byzantine, Eastern Catholic, it is just Roman Catholicism with the veneer of Holy Orthodoxy. It is not Holy Orthodoxy. You need to be in communion with Christ's body, and that is not what you have in the Roman Catholic Church. Even if you have the appearance that on its face it appears like Orthodoxy, I say this out of love. It is not. You need to come to the body of Christ.
Cassian or Ben?
I viewed myself as Orthodox in communion with Rome for a very, very long time. So this question kind of hits close to the heart. And I do know many Eastern Catholics, and then there's a part of me that I want to be careful with how I speak, because there are many disenfranchised Roman Catholics there, and they view it as kind of like this safe haven. So there's kind of the psychology side, pastoral side, but then of course, how do you lead people to the truth? And many of them were bought into this idea of like the Zogby option. It's like a guy at Vatican II who created this option where it's like, hey, I sign off to everything that Orthodoxy believes, but I'm still in communion with the Pope. And so they think that they haven't actually signed off on all the other Roman Catholic dogmas that they have. I mean, to be Eastern Catholic is to sign off on all the Roman Catholic dogmas, including Florence and Vatican I. But many of them think that they are kind of Orthodox in communion with Rome, and they haven't fully embraced Vatican I, or their interpretations are very interesting and very creative. And I know, because I used to try to create a lot of these interesting creative spins on Vatican I just to try to like make it work. So in the end, I think that's what many Eastern Catholics have to face, is that you have signed up for Roman Catholic dogma, belief, practice. And if you think that's the truth, okay, well, more power to you. But in the end, I think, of course, I concluded that there is theological error, there's doctrinal error, there's also the problem of orientation, where it's very difficult to fast. Like Eastern Catholics, they want to fast like the Orthodox, but it's very difficult because they're anchored, they're teamed up with Roman Catholics who are not fasting essentially during Lent. So when I was Roman Catholic, I actually had an Orthodox guy hold me accountable so I could fast like the Orthodox. I'd go like look for Orthodox people. So I think there's also even just like living the Orthodox life out. It can feel very lonely, very isolating, and many people are kind of using it as a bridge, but they're not sure where the bridge goes.
Yeah. Well, I think what you said earlier about it being a safe haven, like, well, it hasn't experienced the innovations of the Novus Ordo. We don't have the clown masses and all this kind of meme stuff going on.
Not for long, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Not for long. I want to share something on the screen, if that's okay. Let me go ahead.
Sure.
I'm going to bring this up to present. Let me know.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
there we go.
Yeah.
So this was something that was announced this April. So there is actually the Synod establishes a new commission dedicated to the Eastern churches. So basically what they're going to do is revisit some of the codes of canon law within the Eastern Catholic churches and update them so that they're more in line with the spirit of synodality. And if you know anything, if you've been following Catholic news for any amount of time, the spirit of synodality, I mean, you can go look at the German synodal model. You can go look at how this is played out on the parish level for multiple of these different groups within the Roman Catholic Church. This is bad news. If they're updating your codes of canon law, this is one of the things that was protecting you from some of the liturgical innovations that have afflicted the Novus Ordo, have afflicted the German Catholics, have afflicted several other Roman Catholic groups. It's not going to be a safe haven for you for very much longer, especially if they actually update this in light of the synodal journey. So I think pretty soon we're going to come to a point where the Eastern Catholics are going to have to make a decision. But this is really, I think, things are going to have to maybe get a little uncomfortable for them before they make that leap. Because right now for them, they're seeing all of this stuff from kind of this third-party perspective, because they're seeing all of the craziness go on in the Novus Ordo. They see the TLM being persecuted, but they're like, well, at least it's not happening for us yet. But just wait and see. I guarantee the same exact thing's going to be hitting these Uniate groups as well.
So one of the objections here is, you're just piling on and you're criticizing Catholicism. Just give me an Orthodox response. Now, this stream tonight was not just let's present Orthodoxy. It was actually let's help a Roman Catholic make a comparison and understand the differences. So that's not our goal tonight, is just to present Orthodoxy. We've done that many times. I have many videos on Orthodox ethos where I'm just sitting down and presenting Orthodoxy. One that I gave to the Australian Rocor youth, for instance, which is right up there. So I don't have a problem doing that, but does somebody want to just give a real quick response to this young lady before we go to the final few words, and then we're going to open it up to questions. We don't have too much longer, and I want to get at least some questions done. So why don't we start with Cassian, or I don't know.
Orthodoxy has a worship first mentality. It takes worship extremely serious. And that's why God made us, was to worship him. And I think we take worship more seriously than any other group out there. And so that's just one quick response. For a Catholic, what I told my kids was, we're becoming more Catholic by becoming Orthodox.
Yeah, for me, in my legal mind, whether that's a bug or a feature, you know, some people dispute it, but I would go to apostolic succession immediately. You have the idea of it already in the Old Testament and in the Jewish tradition of the Smikah chains, which in the New Covenant Church, it's understood as apostolic succession. In order to be the true church, you have to be connected to the apostles, and to be connected, that also is matters of faith, right? So you cannot be changing things. There is one church that has not materially changed from the deposit of faith that we inherited from the apostles. The only one that qualifies for that is the Holy Orthodox Church.
Yeah, the Orthodox Church is the only church where you can historically delineate it's not in schism, that it doesn't have a new line of bishops that were put in place of someone that already had apostolic succession. And so you could find that whether it's the Oriental Orthodox, whether it was the Roman Catholics, everyone split off during very particular historical episodes. It's not even mysterious. And there's a way to know this. The Orthodox still hold to the same canon law. And according to the canon law once that everyone once shared, all the other groups violated this. This sort of like we talked about earlier, Constable 879, 880. There was an agreement and that was violated. There was a common understanding. Orthodoxy just continues according to that understanding. I think it's worth adding. There's not perfection in every corner of the Orthodox Church. We're full of sinful people and ignorant people. So when we say these things, we're talking about what has prevailed over time and what will continue if these things continue as they have. What we're not going to say is that everything that every bishop and every priest and every parish has ever done is perfect, because that's not the case. And we don't want any inquirer walking in and seeing something and then being scandalized. Well, I thought Orthodoxy was perfect. We don't claim it was perfect. It wasn't perfect when the apostles were around, because the apostles had issues they had to work through.
It's a hospital, so obviously it's not going to be perfect on the human side, but it is perfect because Christ is perfect. And that's why you become Orthodox, because you want to have communion with Christ. Right. That's the number one answer.
And that's why it's so important to be in the church that is the original, the apostolically delineated church, not a church that was began by a single bishop who then made a synod of 70 bishops, not a church that's made by the Pope of Rome just making new patriarchates in Antioch and in Egypt, where they never even had clergy there, and things like this, that you're just part of the same church, where whether it's the Bishop of Corinth, like Paul's letter to the Corinthians, whether it's Jerusalem, that there's an unbroken chain of bishops that have not split off anyone. And that is the Orthodox Church. And quite frankly, that's why I became Orthodox. And if you read the scriptures, the normative means of succession is by being appointed by apostle or someone appointed by the apostles. In the earliest document outside the scriptures, in First Clement, it says so explicitly between chapters 40 to 48. Yep. And so the positive case for Orthodoxy is we are it. We are the original church. We don't have to get into, well, there's no canon on this, but there's a bishop that has these extra canonical prerogatives like the Roman Catholic side. We don't have to get into what the Oriental Orthodox claim, where, well, we had no choice, but we had to do this. I'm sure Luther felt he had no choice.
Right.
We don't have to make these sort of arguments. We have the original church delineated to the apostles. And if that means something to you, and if what is scripturally normative, particularly the pastoral epistles, means something to you, then that's extremely relevant.
Okay, 30 seconds, and then we're going to hit the questions. Go for it, Ben.
Sure. One. Liturgical continuity. I mean, I think that's one of the big things for me. Liturgical continuity. Go and examine the Orthodox Church versus any of the other claimants, okay, and see if their liturgy matches up with the liturgy of the early church. You can examine the liturgical reforms of the Roman Catholic Church post-Vatican II. You can even examine, if you're going to look at some of the churches in the Oriental Orthodox communion. We've covered a couple of these instances on my show, and this was the purpose of me bringing them up. There was one that I hadn't shared yet. In Brazil, it's become commonplace to play guitar during the consecration of the Eucharist, and I have several clips to back that up. I haven't displayed that on stream yet, but it's pretty commonplace. You can find this all over the place. So compare the Orthodox liturgical tradition to Protestantism, to Roman Catholicism, to the Orientals. I mean, it's the only option there. So just to keep that short, I'll leave it there.
All right. So let's start with some of these chats and just thank Mr. Octavian. God bless you. And everybody here, he's thanking all of you for the panel tonight. We appreciate the support of the work. Thoughts on SSPX? They are probably going to get excommunicated in July because they are consecrating bishops. They are trying to save Catholicism. What would be the path from there?
Become Orthodox.
What would be, yeah.
Yes.
Well,
there you go. Stop.
Seconded.
I mean, is there Cassian? You spent a lot of time. You're Roman Catholic. Do you think there are SSPX people who are ready to jump ship and become Orthodox because they're getting closer to essentially an ecclesiology which rejects the, or they don't? They're not anywhere near because they're just so committed to the idea of the babies.
I just kind of take a one person at a time approach, like a friendship approach, because why someone went SSPX, they could all have various reasons. I would say the overall mindset of SSPX people in general, it's like there are some ways where they're closer and some ways where there might even be actually farther. Like their views of purgatory, like for example, tend to be like the old school Counter-Reformation style. Whereas if you study like open at 16th Joseph Ratzinger, he's actually coming much closer to St. Mark of Ephesus' view.
Yep.
So it's really just kind of depends on what they're willing to give up. If they're having a whole crisis of their paradigm is just collapsing, they might be open to talking. It's funny though, the SSPX are saying very similar lines that St. Mark of Ephesus said at Florence. It's like, we haven't changed anything. Like they're saying the same exact thing to the Pope. We haven't changed anything. What are you condemning us for? Why are you excommunicating us? Now, of course, I believe SSPX have some serious errors, and maybe they need to take a second look at Florence and St. Mark and the Orthodox faith.
It's kind of like true Orthodoxy, though. They'll be more traditional, pretty much with most matters, but with ecclesiology, it's just anything goes, just what serves their interest at the moment, and that's a radical inconsistency for any group that wants to be traditionalist.
Devil's advocate here. What makes a council ecumenical and binding? If you don't have one guy to break a tie, what do? Who has the keys?
Pentarchic reception. It's a nice.
There are no ties. Yeah. And usually this is solved because we have like block voting. I think a lot of the ecumenical councils require like unanimity in that sense. People say, how can you have it? Well, through block voting. So we never have a situation where, where we're just like resting on one person.
Mm-hmm. What were you saying,
Patrick? I said it's been pentarchic reception, and this is something seen in conciliar minutes where there's this absolute consensus in the votes, and at least if there's disagreement, they just absent themselves from the vote, so there's no dissenting votes.
Yeah, this is in the Chieti document as well. So like Roman Catholics, at least most of their leadership and a lot of our leadership agree on this topic.
Yep. And it's the question that would be, well, how about past the age of the ecumenical councils? And we've still had we still have councils since then. And it's just through consensus, the synods. So it follows a similar model. Just all these different national churches didn't exist during the first 1,000 years because there's still mainly the Roman Empire. And other churches were part of the pentarchy. So it's, again, it's just the reception of the whole church. It's not a very vague thing. And for what it's worth, this is something that existed in the West as well. The Spanish Synod accepted the 6th Ecumenical Council before they accepted the 5th Ecumenical Council. And they were maintaining communion with other churches in the West. Same with Nicaea too, which really wasn't fully accepted in France until the 1300s. So like, these are things that the reception makes where everyone recognizes this is what really occurred. If it was just a pope waving a magic wand, then the West would have not had for centuries, other Western churches not accepting certain ecumenical councils.
By the way, today I heard for the first time that there are Monophysites or Miaphysites who don't accept Constantinople I, Second Ecumenical Council. Is that true?
I've never heard that because they have the creed of that council, but I'm sure they take issue with the canon, the council that makes Constantinople second behind Rome. And it's very interesting. I don't want to dogpile Oriental Orthodox because this isn't the show for it, but I'll just say quickly, there are certain papist elements within Oriental Orthodoxy.
It's a very good point.
You know, Jacob Borodai, it's in his hagiography, took on direct jurisdiction, that he became a bishop without a local jurisdiction so he could consecrate someone everywhere. The next time that's mentioned is about the Pope of Rome, centuries later, by the way. So they kind of invented the papacy for the papacy. And similarly, this idea that you could accept the council and then nullify individual canons you don't like, you know, this is something that they proceed significantly, at least Rome's explanation of this idea, which is with Anastasius Librarian writing to Pope John VIII. It's not that there was no precedent. We know Canon 28 had some disagreement, you know, with Pope Leo not accepting. We know that the third letter of Cyril to Nestorius wasn't accepted by the Church of, I think, Florence, even though they accepted the Fifth Ecumenical Council where you had to accept this letter. And so it's not that we have no examples of local nullifications, so to say, but to so flagrantly just like pick and choose your canons is something that became a modus operandi in Roman canon law, but it exists in Oriental Orthodoxy as well. And when they've accepted these canons in councils they attended. So it's problematic because you essentially have to invent this ecclesiology in order to justify that you're not operating by the agreed upon rules to begin with. And so what Rome did is just a natural consequence of that.
Why is the absence and the not even being included or invited to the Second Ecumenical Council for the Pope of Rome, not even in communion with the president? Why is that just not a total deal breaker for Vatican I and papacy?
Well, to be fair, I don't think that's actually true. We have a letter from the Pope to St. Ascolius at Thessalonica, where he gives instructions to him and to the rest of the synod, which only Ascolius end up attending, what to do at the Council of Constantinople, in which to decide over who would be the next patriarch, and that was the 381 Council. What was the issue afterwards?
That doesn't mean he attended. That doesn't mean he had attended or was invited or had legates. It was just telling somebody who was going.
Well, Ascolius, Thessalonica was under his jurisdiction and given instructions. And St. Ambrose says that through a single legate. It was seen as a
local council. It wasn't even seen as an ecumenical council when it was called. Right? It wasn't trying to be an ecumenical council.
I'd have to return to its synodical letter. So I don't want to debate it. But I think
so
that's
my,
a sort
point,
of
my point is that
I
made
believe
an
that's
ecumenical council. The Pope didn't make it an ecumenical council.
No, it was ecumenical council, just like the fifth was by the council declaring it and then it being received.
Right. So on so many levels, I don't see how they can how Vatican I withstands the reality on the ground of the Second Ecumenical and its exception and you know him not even being in communion with the president. Why? From the Vatican I perspective, right? Which I'm not that familiar with. Maybe Cassian, what do you think? How do they get around it? I've never heard an argument from them, so maybe I'm just ignorant of this.
Are you asking me about the Second Ecumenical Council and all the details?
How does the defenders of Vatican I get around the problem of the Second Ecumenical Council in the sense that the Pope was essentially not invited, didn't participate? I know now, you know, he had somebody from his jurisdiction come, but it was not even meant to be an ecumenical council, and he wasn't in communion with the head of it. So is that not a kind of a deal breaker for Vatican I? Or how do they get around it? Have you heard an argument, the defense?
I think Patrick was kind of going in that direction. There's different interpretations on whether someone was in communion or not. I'm not like up to speed. Like I'm not an expert on those matters. I've heard other people talk about those details. Right. I could comment on Roman Catholicism after the schism and how they even have a reception model before Vatican I. For example, there's two examples I could give really quickly. One is they were voting bishops at the Council of Trent who didn't accept Florence. So that's already kind of an odd thing, right? Why would they even be allowed to be there if they weren't allowed, if they weren't accepting Florence? It was kind of this debated point if you were in certain regions. And so there was, you know, canonists who are coming up with ecumenical council lists even after Trent that they're trying to get everybody to buy into. So there was even like a reception mode happening even in the second millennium in the West. Council of Constance is ratifying several councils, I believe. So Roman Catholics oftentimes have an illusion that even after the schism, everything was like clean cut in the West, but it's just so messy in the West for so long. I think people getting up to speed on Western church history can be very helpful in this conversation as well with reception of councils.
Yeah, just real quick to speak to that. I think, Father Peter, you are correct. That is an extreme problem for them. And I just pulled up the synodal letter of that council to confirm what I thought I remembered. So it was written a year after the council, and it does refer to that the 381 council in Constantinople as ecumenical. Now, I understand that can have like different meanings, whether it refers to it as imperial because it was in Constantinople. Maybe that's an argument they could make. It seems to me like that's grasping at straws a bit, and that it was recognized as like a council that is uncontroversially accepted by everyone, with the exception of some canons, as Craig said, because the synodal letter is specifically addressed to Western bishops and the Roman Synod. So I think it's a huge problem.
Okay. So I got off topic because we don't have time for that, and it's my fault. But I can do that because I'm running the show. Father Turbo said it takes about 10 years to acquire an Orthodox phronema. Do you agree with that? And what exactly is being acquired after many years? Kind of off topic, but it does actually matter because it means that if it takes 10 years to get a phronema after baptism, how much more of a struggle is it for somebody outside who's not living the life of the church to acquire? And I think that drives home what we said from the very beginning, which how important it is to try to understand Orthodox in its context and not from outside, from other presuppositions. Go ahead.
I would agree with what Father Turbo says there. It's commonly said, when I was catechized, I was told that it's a nice round number. It might be 7 years, might be 6, might be 11. I'd say if you come in as a Protestant, you're getting to know the saints. It'll take you 10 years to truly love them and really seek them in intercession and really have that relationship with the saints. That's a decent litmus test. There's others that come in and they're on fire and love with the saints. But you need 10 years just to attend the services, to receive the sacraments, and to really just be spiritually conformed.
Yeah, there are some instances where zeal cannot make up for time. There are some things where you just need time in the church. So I think Father Turbo's right on point with that.
St. Joseph the Hesychast says discernment, the highest of the virtues, is only acquired through experience. You cannot just be born with it or acquire it by being around somebody who has it. You have to have experience of it. So I think if that's the case with the greatest of the virtues, it makes sense that the general outlook.
The second part of that question, like, what are we acquiring? What's the mind of the church, right? So like that 10 years is a general principle, but really this is something you are all continually changing. The mind of the church is the mind of Christ, right? And we're trying to be conformed to his image. So this is something that goes on into the eschaton even.
Will we have a chance to discuss the liturgical differences that arose between us and the Catholic Church? I think this is a far more difficult problem because it touches on everyday life. We'll have one person answer this. Who's going to be the most prepared to answer this one? Who's got their feet on the ground on this one? Cassian.
Can you repeat the question? I would.
Here, I'll just dive in. I'll just dive in. I mean, it's a complete innovation. So you have the Gregorian reforms, and then after Vatican II, you have even further liturgical reforms. I mean, you can look on the ground today. You walk into any of the normal Novus Ordo parishes, it's going to look almost indistinguishable from any Protestant church you walk into. Especially the main lines. It's going to look very similar to a mainline Protestant church. Oftentimes they will have, I mean, modern evangelical worship music. There are several different Roman Catholic churches that, I mean, it's indistinguishable from a mega church worship service. I've reported on several of these instances, but it's becoming more and more increasingly popular, especially within the Catholic charismatic movement. The liturgy is it's just kind of a free-for-all at this point, is what it seems like. And this has devolved into theological changes, changes in the life of the parish. It's chaos. This is why when you see these kind of like these masses that people will call abuses, they're not really. It's almost become the norm at this point, especially around me. I mean, I tell this to people all the time. You have this concept of the Roman Catholic Church that the apologists will sell you, especially the online apologists. They'll try to sell you some medieval iteration of the church. Oh, look, we got the Crusader memes. We got all this stuff. Oh, like the Pope's so powerful. He's going to call a new crusade. Oh, it's so base. Go to the actual Novus Ordo parishes. What you're going to see is the same stuff that these guys that are in OCIA will send me. Like they were like, oh, I left mid OCIA. That's what it's called now, by the way. It's not RCIA anymore. But they're mid OCIA. They leave. They're like, my parish had Pachamama statues. My parish was celebrating Hindu holidays. My parish was doing the chicken dance during the Eucharist. Like, what are we doing? These are things that people are telling me that I've actually spoken to.
We're talking about America mainly. America, or is it all over the place?
No, Germany, Italy, everywhere. I mean, in some cases overseas, it's much worse. America, honestly, is kind of like a conservative bastion for Roman Catholicism. And this is speculation on my part, but I think this is partially why they elected a American Pope this round. Well, first off, to recover U.S. aid funds. This is another tangent, but to recover U.S. aid funds that they lost, but also so that they could kind of quell this American conservative Catholic like kind of resurgence, because they're not afraid to criticize the Pope. But go to Germany, go look at Italy, go look at these other places, and it is much more theologically liberal. Just watch any of the Catholic news streams that we've done. We report from all around the world. Argentina, same thing.
So, Ben, you're pointing out the abuses. They might say, well, those are abuses. Those aren't actually what the church is blessed. That's not what the Vatican II did. It's not actually if you go to a faithful priest, I'm just trying to be, so-called devil's advocate. They are so would they have any basis to say you should compare apples and apples? Like apples would be our straight up Orthodox, what we really believe should be an Orthodox liturgy, et cetera, with their straight up version of that.
My response to that would be, where are these so-called abuses being disciplined? Show me an example. Where are these abuses being disciplined? Because they've become normative practice.
Well, I mean, also on the other side of the coin, the traditional Latin Mass is like systematically being discontinued. Like this is a systematic effort. They want to stop the traditional Latin Mass from occurring in the United States. And this is like trad Caths are just like being kind of herded into a certain spot, and they're going to be pushed out with the SSPX. This is what I see. Taylor Marshall, famous Roman Catholic apologist and scholar, has like the same conclusion as I do on this, that it is a systematic herding and shifting of traditional Catholics in favor of like Novus Ordo practices.
I wonder aloud how much of this is just really the difference between urban Roman Catholicism in big cities, whether it's Berlin, New York City, LA, versus suburbs and rural areas.
That's a good point.
And I think Orthodoxy would have very similar problems along those same demographic lines.
Yeah, I wouldn't grant that.
Not to that degree.
No way.
New York's pretty crazy.
I haven't seen the Clown Divine Liturgy yet, thank God.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit of a stretch there, Mr. Truglia. I'm going to take issue with it. It's a bit of a stretch. I mean, you got a point, but then you kind of like nuked every other difference. I think there is a extreme reality.
The grass is not always greener.
Let me clarify.
I've never walked into a clown mass, is all I could say.
Let me clarify.
So I think it's, if you're going to the church with a rainbow flag in front, you're going to see some crazy stuff, but that exists all across the board, everywhere, with everyone other than the.
It's a question of degrees. It's a subjective thing. How can we determine it? We don't have but the impression is given that it is more extensive. Go ahead.
Well, to be fair, the only thing that I'm referencing is contemporary worship. I'm not even discussing the pride masses. I'm not even discussing any of that. I'm discussing the inclusion of contemporary worship in their mass. And this is what is actually occurring on the ground. Go to any Novus Ordo parish in the United States, other countries, you're going to see in the vast majority of them contemporary worship. This is what's been adopted, and this is allowed based upon some of the changes that they've made to the liturgy. I mean, Sacrosanctum Concilium. This was, one of the changes that was happening around the time of the Second Vatican Council, and this led to what a lot of people may consider abuses, but this has almost become normative. I don't necessarily think that I would consider that being like an abuse in the Roman Catholic Church, just having contemporary like CCM style worship. This seems to have become really, really common.
Well, and also the distribution of the elements, like it seems almost ubiquitous practice now that like the priest, at least maybe this is a little bit anecdotal, or I don't know, Cassian, if you could confirm, because I don't want to belabor the topic too much. We got to keep moving, but that you'll have lay people handing out the elements like quite frequently. Like this is not even controversial anymore. Like this is, it seems to be an MO at this point.
Yeah, well, there's a lot that could be said about liturgy. One of the things that was really disappointing for a lot of Catholics that are conservative and value liturgy is that there was an attempt by Cardinal Sarah and Pope Benedict XVI to create a reform of the reform. And that was effectively shut down by Pope Francis. And it doesn't really look like Pope Leo is of that mindset. And so there is a crisis about like, what do you do? How do you restore this thing? Because it's fairly well admitted that what happened in the 70s and 80s and 90s with all of the options that are allowed via the new mass, like you can play any kinds of music. So I went to some very reverent ones. I went to ones that felt like very hippie 1970s, some that were very evangelical that reminded me of my Protestant days. So you can find lots and lots of different modes. Those who are conservative liturgically, they don't want that. Like I know many, one of the things is that the reality is that in America, many of the priests are becoming more and more conservative. The stats show this. I know this from my own network of Catholic priests. There's a number of different factors. One is nobody wants to be a priest unless they think it's real, has some value of truth, like a lot of these guys. Secondly, they're bringing a lot of priests from India and Africa who are pretty conservative. They may not be conservative liturgically about everything, but they're definitely shutting some things down, like priests, like very liberal stuff that was happening in Indianapolis, for example, is being shut down by these Indian and Nigerian priests.
Yeah. What about like lay people distributing the elements? Do you know specifically about that?
Oh, that's normal. That's
so like, that's an enormous difference, I think, between Orthodox practice and
that's normal. I will say one change that's happened recently, like it was John Paul II was against altar servers that were girls. Then he flipped on it and allowed exceptions. Pope Benedict was kind of against it, but he kind of tolerated it. Pope Francis basically put it into canon law. Like this is going to be what everyone does. And that has caused a little bit of crisis among priests, because there are priests that are like, we're only doing male altar servers, and they try to be very traditional. And now there's a little bit of a top-down initiative to say, no, you need to allow all the girls in your youth group or your Catholic school to come and be altar servers. And that can be a little bit jarring for these priests from India, Nigeria, or just conservative priests under Pope, that they went to seminary under Pope Benedict XVI. So there's a lot that could be said about these things.
Yeah, we could have a whole discussion on contemporary liturgical practices, and I think it would be very revealing. And I, as a priest, I've got a pretty good experience. I've been in Rope Corps. I grew up in the Antiochians. My father was an Antiochian priest. I spent 20 years in Greece, Mount Athos, around the monasteries, and it's rare to go to a parish. They exist, but it's rare to go to a parish where I feel like, what is this? It's very rare. It's like you pretty much walk in and this is what I know. Now there are liturgical differences, of course. They're Russian, Greek, and all that, but these are minor things. These are not anything like what we're hearing Cassian talk about right now.
Yeah, I mean, most of the apologists online, they're either traditional Latin Mass, Eastern Catholic or Anglican ordinariate. And they're not even just the apologists, like the scholars. Like I know a number of scholars, they go to the Anglican ordinariate, or so it does say something that when most of your thinkers and scholars and speakers are trying to find the 1%, because they know there's a massive problem. So.
What is the best argument for a trad cat husband that is not interested in Orthodoxy? They are settled and they don't want to change. I don't want to do a good thing in a bad way. How long can one stay outside of communion? I think this is either a catechumen or a choir who's been a choir for a long time, hoping her husband will come around. He's not really moving, and she's kind of frustrated. So this is part pastoral, but it's also an intellectual question. So those who knows among us the trad cat mentality the best? Probably Cassian, right? Because you lived it a bit.
Yeah, I mean, when I had a lot of friends knowing that I was becoming Orthodox, there were attempts for me. They thought that I just hadn't considered the trad cat option, or I hadn't considered Eastern Catholicism. It's like I knew all about those things for a very, very long time, and one of the things that a lot of the trad cats don't know what to deal with is, they are upset about liturgical abuses. They're upset about changes, and but when you have to admit, like, or show them, you guys have it too. Like I explained to them, if I left the Novus Ordo, the new Mass, for the traditional Latin Mass, I no longer commune from the chalice, which I actually view as like an important thing. Orthodox view that as an important thing. St. Simeon of Thessalonica talks about that as an innovation of the Latins, suspending the chalice to the laity. And so I told them this, like, that's an innovation, that you don't commune the laity that way. And they don't like to hear that, but they eventually will have to, like, through study, admit it. Unfortunately, Ben Bollinger recently wrote a Catholic Answers article saying that we Orthodox stole that argument from the Protestants and Calvinists. It's like, I showed him in 2 seconds. Like, he posted the article, and like 5 minutes later, I made a video because I got the book. Literally, you got St. Simeon saying that in like the 14th century.
Yeah, I think Cassian is spot on this one to emphasize a sacramental approach to, like, paedo communion.
That's the one.
Communion in both kinds.
Huge.
Yeah.
Infant communion's huge because it shows you not just an error in discipline, but also an error in your worship, because they want to take worship very seriously, which is a good thing. I mean, you got to acknowledge, I'm someone who's not just trying to always trying to be super negative about the corruption and the scandal, because I've noticed people need a little bit of both. Like, when you're helping them along, like they need affirmation. Like, this is a good thing that you're processing, like
prioritizing the right thing. Yeah.
Like, there's a good thing, good movement happening here. So just acknowledge that and try to be positive. And I think, but I think infant communion and the chalice are two good ways to start. Minor orders can help, but that's just the area of liturgy and worship. But that's where I would begin with traditional Catholics.
Agreed.
Thank you. I'm an Anglican inquiring into Orthodoxy. I was disappointed going to Novus Ordo Mass to find it was identical to our Mass. So there's an Anglican telling us that there's no difference, basically, in contemporary Catholicism with Anglican worship.
That's what
I remember. Yeah, I remember attending a Roman Catholic service in New Orleans back in 2006 or 7 or something, and it had altar girls, which I never saw before at that point, and it was really no different than the Lutherans. In fact, the readings were the exact same that day too. I guess the Lutherans probably took it from the Roman Catholics, but it's it's very similar. It's like it would be high church Protestant.
SSPX to Melkite here before Orthodoxy. I was choosing what was dogmatic and crafting my own theories of the papacy, extremely relativistic. My wife, Cradle SSPX, says Orthodoxy is way more unified. Thank
Glory
you,
to
John
God.
Albanus. Yeah, that's an interesting witness. Yeah, very important. Feel free to comment in about 5 seconds on that, because we got to keep going. But anybody
Good
wants
comment,
to say
John.
That's all I got. Good. Good.
All right. Just thank you to Shanala's 633, whatever that name is. Thank you, Matthew Jenkins. Good to have you as always. We already did that. Let me go.
Ash had a super chat earlier. He was asking about what would we need for a reunion or something.
Is this one here? Huh? No. Wait a minute.
Ash Mays.
I got it right here.
There you go.
I don't know what the theory is. He must be maybe, I don't know what that is, but Rome concedes everything EO requires for unity. What does that look like? What's the role of the Pope and Patriarchs? What would be conceded? Let me just start off by saying it's never going to happen, but if you want to talk theory,
it's not realistic.
Yeah.
The reality is it would be like, well, wouldn't it be great if we made all of China the United States? We'd just become China. That's the reality. I mean, it hurts. I don't want 1 billion Roman Catholics not to be Orthodox, but you couldn't simply just absorb that much without them absorbing you. And so even if all their bishops, we're just speaking real world, even if all their bishops, really sincerely signed into everything, you couldn't, everyone, even their clergy would have to be recatechized. This isn't like when Russia's absorbing Orthodox lands that were essentially fake unions until like the last 50 years, because that's been a big change in unitism in the last 50 years, where like really it was just ecclesiological difference. But once they were reabsorbed, they had the same icons, they had the same everything. This would be very different with the Ocean Roman Catholic Church. And like, it's not something I'm happy about, but this is very tragic. But, I don't want to quote my bishop again on this, but the reality is they would need to be baptized. They would need to be recatechized. But if people wanted to be Orthodox, that wouldn't be an impediment. But if it is an impediment to them because they don't want to be Orthodox that badly, then you're going to be drowned in that ocean. And so it's not realistic. But if entire synods want to submit the bishops, and if the entire synods want to submit everyone there to recatechesis and all this, then it could work, just like converting anyone. It's like when a Anglican parish or whatever converts to Orthodoxy, which does occur. But everyone gets recatechized and everything. That'd be the only way forward.
I think Craig is right.
I got to read it. Can I buy a Greek prayer book, Bible, Psalms in New Greek? I'm learning New Greek now, and I want to read prayers in parallel. Old Greek is preferable. No, you can't do modern Greek. It's no comparison to ancient Greek. I'm sorry. It's a spoken language. You're not going to be able to do that. So you got to go. So too many big names for one panel. Okay. Well, thanks for that. That's nice. We got a lot of questions here. Unfortunately, I've only got about 10 minutes, and I think I really don't know where to begin. There's tons and tons of questions. So let's just start from the top and get really rapid fire, like yes or no. I'm a Catholic inquirer into Orthodox, and I was wondering what's the evidence of the essence energies distinction before Palamas? Also, any book recommendation?
Read the synodical decree of 1340 because it just cites 4th century fathers over and over and over. You could read Theophilus of Antioch, who goes to the energy essence distinction. You could read Wisdom of Solomon. You could read Saint Dionysius, who recent scholarship has vindicated the authenticity of that corpus. But to make your life easy, I just go with the conciliar definition of the Palamite councils, because they cite tons of people way before them. It's just not serious to say that this is a development. Clearly, it's just the original doctrine of the church.
And Dr. David Bradshaw makes a good case for it in the Bible. And for the book recommendations, I'd say for a theological one, Saint Palamas shreds the Filioque in this one, like utterly to shreds. And for a historical review, Sashinsky's book.
Great. That reminds me, I didn't even do this. These books are highly recommended if you haven't read them and you want to go deep. 2 Paths, Greek East, Latin West, the Phocian Schism, and then we don't have time to go through all of them, but we'll go through the big ones here at Uncommon Press. Of course, the most important. I'm sorry, that's shameless. The Church and the Pope by Robert Spencer. That's a very easy read for somebody who's not that, doesn't have to go deep into history. This is just his kind of take. Catholicism in Light of Orthodoxy from Elder George of Grigorio Manathos, a great contemporary church father. The Papacy, of course, is a classic work on Abigute, the convert in the 1850s in France to Orthodoxy. We've already talked about the phenomenal book by his truly here, Mr. Truglia, The Errors of the Latins, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Anything better probably not. I don't think in English language there's anything better than these 2 volumes in terms of just scope and, presenting everything. It's unbelievable. There's so much that people don't know. And this volume 1 is on pre-order, and volume 2 is about to go on pre-order. Unfortunately, we've had great delays. I need to start telling people this. This is very hard to say as a publisher, but unfortunately, the contemporary financial situation is getting worse and worse, and we're already feeling it. So all the prices are going up and delays, and so we have delays on the fulfillment on this book. Unfortunately, weeks, if not more. On the Dogma of the Church and Bible Church History, I think are important reads for Roman Catholics because they have really important things for Protestants as well, probably more for Protestants, but also Roman Catholics, because here the patristic theology from the earliest church time, and here the contemporary answer to many of the ecumenistic and Western ideas. And there's a great essay in this on the right here, Bible Church History, on the difference between Orthodoxy in terms of understanding of confession and repentance with regard to Catholicism. Really good essay by St. Hilarion. So very good books. Orthodox Patristic Witness Concerning Catholicism, 1,000 pages, all the fathers from the last millennium. There's nothing like it in any language. Give kudos to largely done by Subdeacon Nectarius before he departed into far right delusion land, unfortunately. But he did an amazing job of researching unbelievable amounts of material for the Orthodox witness of the fathers with regard to Catholicism over the last millennium. We talked about this book from Father Peter, this what do you call it? Donkey here that's talking to you. And St. Gregory Palamas on the procession just mentioned. That's why I remembered all this. And then, of course, the Acts of the Eighth Ecumenical Council. So all those are relevant to our discussion and to your search tonight, all of you searching out there. Okay, next question. Did we already do this? Well, looking for an Orthodox church, what should I do and even expect? Just go and see. Come and see, like they say in the scriptures. And you got to find a local church. Go to a couple. If you got a couple, go to a couple different ones.
And check out a live stream or something. A lot of them have it just to be familiar.
Yeah, go stand in the back.
The Ecumenical Council is because Emperor J. Dyer of Wittgenstein isn't here tonight. Okay.
Maybe we'll get a reception from him afterwards. Who knows?
Who's his legate today?
Alex, you can take that right. There you go.
Sure. Here, I'm curious about the polemism and Thomism debate. How about you get to it? Thanks. Okay.
And again, I think Dr. David Bradshaw makes such a good case from St. Paul's writings, this distinction between like first and second actuality with dynamis and energeia. There has always been a distinction between like God's power in himself and how it manifests throughout the world. And you see it again in the Cappadocians, like Craig's answer earlier, referring to those conciliar documents, I think hit the nail on the head. They go through like many fathers.
Why did Roman Catholicism continue so strongly since they departed from the faith, while other heretical groups seem to dwindle down and become almost forgotten about? What made Roman Catholicism different? So what's this, why do they stick around as a very, prominent global, etc.? I mean, that's
the real answer is demographic. It's Spain and Portugal. It's not too complicated. You take out, if Spain and Portugal didn't exist, you'd have 700 million Roman Catholics disappear.
Okay, we're going to have to go with very short answers, and that's the one we have. How does the Orthodox understanding of the Eucharist differ from that of Roman Catholic Church? That's not a small matter. First of all, transubstantiation, big topic. We could go on for the rest of the night on that one. Used among some Orthodox, but the theological content obviously is very different, right, Mr. Truglia?
I don't know. It doesn't seem too different if you really think it's his flesh and blood. I'd say that's pretty much what it is.
Explanation. Let me put it.
But I will say this though. I think COVID brought out the real difference. And not to get this stream taken down, I don't know if they're still persecuting over this disease, but you would have fine arguments made that the Eucharist can make you sick because the accidents could have COVID or any given disease. And it shows you this is not the teaching of the Orthodox Church, because even the Ecumenical Patriarchate, which prescribed all these protections and whatnot, still said, no, the Eucharist, the medicine of immortality, it doesn't make you sick. And they've said this in rejecting gluten-free communion, which, by the way, in the Roman Catholic Church, they do have gluten-free Eucharist. So there is a difference in orthopraxy, and what we mean by it has to be different because we don't argue the accidents can make you sick.
Cassian, would you answer this one? How does the Orthodox doctrine of theosis? I know you got 1 minute to answer this question. How does the Orthodox doctrine of theosis differ from the Roman Catholic understanding of deification? Is that something that you can just say in a couple words?
Well, I mean, I think that relates to the essence energies distinction. So how we view the Holy Spirit indwelling in us and our participation in that fire. There would be a difference between the Thomist, the Aquinist position.
Yeah, I think read St. Palamas has disputations with a Barlaamite. I think he makes a very strong case that created grace cannot deify you in that one.
About apostolic succession, do you acknowledge the Catholics have the ability to administer the sacraments uniquely along with the Orthodox Church? The answer is
no.
No.
No. St. Augustine said they baptize, but not with the Holy Spirit. So if Augustine doesn't have your back, then no.
They're empty forms.
Yeah, no, we don't have this idea of apostolic succession in and of itself. The historical succession, therefore, means you have a legitimate, valid, quote unquote, mysteries. It presupposes the Orthodox faith, and if you depart from the Orthodox faith and therefore the Orthodox communion, Saint Basil says it right there in Canon 1, but so many other fathers do too. So I don't know why. It's very strange to me how they think about the mysteries. Look, the priesthood serves the church. You can't take it with you. Like, we don't have this indelible priesthood Aquinan idea, right? So that's, I think, where that all begins. Imagine I'm an inquirer.
We answered this one.
Yeah, sorry, you're right. Sorry, got it. Does Orthodoxy allow for reform if it is found that a doctrine is faulty and a new revelation is made by a priest?
Luckily, we don't have that problem.
The church doesn't lose to heresy. The church always triumphs over heresy.
We've never had that problem. Yeah. We never will. Doesn't happen.
I mean, there are some times where it might seem dicey, but the church never loses. It always triumphs.
Dog piling is very useful. If you what exactly? I'm not sure that was a question. I don't know. Got it. Okay. We've got like 1 minute, so I don't think we're going to be able to answer. These are long questions. Let's just try one.
It's birthdays.
Father Salva said, you said today a custom has become prevalent for people to celebrate their birthdays. Kind of off topic. We're not going to get into that.
For what's worth, I don't, but it's not for any theological reason. It just doesn't mean anything to me. That New Year's Day is, I don't know. I don't get it.
That's a ask your priest question, I think.
I want Roman Catholics.
There you go. Good response.
Roman Catholics, then their questions. What do I do if, after researching history, I come to a Roman Catholic conclusion? That's
you messed up somewhere.
Yeah.
You fast, you pray, and you didn't read this book.
Read Craig's book.
Well, I think that the another answer is perhaps you have not gotten out of that paradigm we talked about, those presuppositions. Maybe and this is very common, maybe you're looking at the Orthodox through a prism which can't make sense of it, right?
Spend time in St. Basil's letters and to St. Gregory Nazianzus, his letters, and tell me that you're going to come out of that like Roman Catholic. There's no way you're going to come out of that Roman Catholic. I'm sorry. It's like impossible. The things he says about like Antioch, he uses they both use the exact same honorifics for Antioch that any Roman Catholic would use for Rome.
I mean, I'll best that, and this might help the woman with her husband in their issue. Yeah. Read a life of a pre-schism saint every day and do a pre-schism prayer rule. It's just going to change your heart and you'll be Orthodox.
Word.
So this is an interesting question, but it's the last one, unfortunately, because I'm going to say thank you to this person for their donation. And how come Greek churches have altar girls? Well, because some people are dumb and innovate. I don't know. Forgive me.
Because they're too close to major cities.
They done goofed.
Accept the Fourth Council. What makes the council ecumenical? Because of acceptance, right? But that's
they did. But they did. So see, that this is a meme that has to die. The Egyptian Synod did accept that council. They elected a new patriarch, and then that patriarch and the Synod accepted the council. And the contrary patriarch was not canonically elected. He didn't have the election of the Synod. So this is one of those things where that pentarchic reception was actually met for Chalcedon, and Oriental Orthodox and Roman Catholics enabling those arguments just ignore what is plain documented historical fact.
Yeah, hugely important. That is a huge point. right? They don't know the history post Chalcedon. It's so we're very excited at Uncommon Press because not only do we have 21 new books on the forthcoming page right now, so go check them out if you're interested. 21 new books. Some of those books you here on this panel are going to be very excited about because I know your interests. But we're also not even on that list. There's 2 books that aren't even on the list, and one is we've been working on forever, and hopefully it'll come out in this year. And that is a massive tome from the Monastery of Grigoriou on the non-Chalcedonian or anti-Chalcedonians. All of the texts written by Elder George of Grigoriou, Father Luke, and the Holy Community of Athos with regard to the dialogue and the various challenges to the Orthodox position, the idea that they're Orthodox, they've accepted essentially the Fourth Council in terms of theology. That's a tome that we're working on, but we have very close to being finished by a friend of ours, David Erkan, who has spent a lot of time on this topic. He's finishing up a book for the layman, although it's not going to be an easy read for the layman, but it's meant for the average person who wants to understand this topic. And I hope we'll have it in our hands soon. We'll be reviewing it, but we hope to publish it in the near future. So there's a tremendous amount of work, and you've done a lot of good work, Patrick, and I appreciate that very much. There's a tremendous amount of work we need to do because a lot of Orthodox don't understand, let alone the heterodox. We don't understand at all what's going on with the Fourth Council and the so-called Miaphysites or the non-Chalcedonians. So that's coming soon. But I'm going to have to put an end to it here. It's been a great stream. Lots of people loved it. We're up to 1,400 people right now. I wish we could keep going, but we have a feast tomorrow. It's called the Feast of St. John the Baptist, and I have a parish, so we have to depart. And it's great. It's great that we were able to do this. And we should do it again because I think it's going to be helpful. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for spending time, and we'll see you soon. Hopefully again here on Orthodox Ethos. Thanks for joining,
Father.
All right. Good night, everybody. God bless.